I think.
Sorry.
No worries. Kim Morrow will be devastated. So just to kind of recap for the record, we received a communication from Jim Murphy on behalf of the applicant stating that the well and septic plans for lot 3 and lot 4 have been withdrawn by the applicant. I think that with the materials provided being fairly specific to the topography of the lot and in the absence of an application and the possibility that future applications would render the topic moot, I think we probably should not have the discussion on water courses and open drains in the absence of an application on that topic. I know Mr. Moore and Mr. Horsley have kind of presented some comments on that and have shared those materials with the board, and I certainly think they may be salient depending on what the future holds for this parcel. But in the absence of a septic and well permit, I don't know that we've got a sort of purview for that, a venue for that discussion. And I'd sort of invite discussion for other members of the board on that in that regard, and then sort of comment from abutters and the applicant. I see Jim Murphy off mute, so maybe we'll start with Matt and Daryl, and I think I see Rebecca. Does that sound like a reasonable approach?
I agree completely. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll say it's right. The drain issue is a physical thing. It's there. However, we do have this listed as discussion of that drain at lot 3 and 4. And those don't exist in a way for the Board of Health at the moment since they've been withdrawn.
And again, certainly any issues with the drain could also be mitigated with a different set of plans potentially. So, you know, my inclination is not to sort of discuss a hypothetical or historical, but when we have that discussion to anchor in sort of whatever is appropriate for actual plans. Jim, I see you coming off mute. Do you have something you want to add?
No, I agree that you should not discuss those matters since they've been withdrawn.
Fair enough. And I think the other thing I would say, just for the purposes of the public record, is as Jim Murphy had made kind of a couple of assertions in his communication, which I think was distributed to the board. You know, again, I don't want to have an extended discussion of it tonight because I think it's outside the scope of our discussion. But you know, for the record, would say, you know, I think Mr. Murphy and I see some pieces differently there, and I don't know that we're going to get to a resolution on that tonight. But just to kind of state that silence on the topic doesn't suggest agreement. But it sounds like for the lot 3 and 4, there's some agreement there. And then Brian Moore and Dennis Murphy, I just want to give you a similar chance to comment, kind of as interested abutters and given the back and forth. Again, I think the board's pretty clear here, but I don't want to silence you.
As long as the other agenda item that was postponed from 2 meetings ago gets heard tonight, I think that we as abutters and our legal counsel and our consultants who are all here tonight are comfortable with letting this lie until the applicant prepares something that conforms.
Okay, so it sounds like for the lot 3 and 4, that won't be discussed further tonight. For the 53 Farm Road, I think we also received a letter from Jim Murphy requesting that not be considered. I think in that case, I don't agree with Mr. Murphy, and I think that it's certainly within the purview of abutters to raise and address concerns and bring them to the board, and appropriate for the board to kind of hear and understand that. And so, you know, from my standpoint, I would favor having having Mr. Moore or any other abutters raise whatever questions they have. I don't know that that means that that there'll be an actionable output for me, but I certainly think it's an appropriate use of a public forum to allow communication to the full board in an open meeting. Are there any concerns for other members of the board with that approach?
No, that sounds reasonable.
Okay. Brian, I think you were the kind of concerned party who reached out. Maybe you want to frame or introduce the topic and we can go from there.
Certainly, thank you very much.
I guess I just would like to, I know that you didn't read the objection.
Well, no, I read it, Jim. I just don't agree with it.
No, I know, but I think that before Mr. Moore or anybody who represents him, who's given opportunity to speak, is aware of the fact that we have objected to this, and that as there is nothing pending before the Board of Health for the property owned by my clients, that and particularly since this property is for sale, that anything that they say that they are seeking to cloud the property's marketability is a risk that they run, and that we object to them saying anything about the property to cloud its marketability and to interfere with the advantageous contract rights that we have based on the permits that have already been rendered. And I appreciated that you recognize that I submitted that, but I wanted to state it on the record because they may not have received that or reviewed that.
And Jim, did you provide that to them?
No,
No.
because I don't believe that there is a hearing process that is before
Look,
the Board
yeah,
of Health. And
Totally
I
fine.
don't believe that a resident should have the right to just say, hey, I want to talk about somebody else's property without there being an application before the board.
So Jim, just to speak to that issue, because I think it actually has come up for us on multiple occasions with, for example, with manure, where an abutter may say, hey, I've got concerns about my neighbor's handling of a manure pile as it relates to my well in the storage. So I certainly think there's other venues where an abutter can be an interested party, and that there's a forum to raise that. And I think, I suspect that, with the communication that you provided, I certainly appreciate your position and your point of view on it, but I also think from an open meeting standpoint, it's, again, I'll leave it to Mr. Moore and his counsel about what he chooses to bring or raise, but I don't know that the act of discussing it in a public forum represents a defamatory action, or that for the board to hear concerns raised is in any way jeopardizing the property. I think it's sort of us saying if somebody has a concern and there's a venue for it, to sort of raise that. I know that you and I believe Mr. Murchison is kind of aware of the requests that were made previously, so suspect none of this will be a surprise or new information to you. But again, I think that, from my standpoint, I think it's appropriate for Mr. Moore to be able to raise his concern, although again, I'm not saying that there's some specific action I personally intend to take, but I think it's certainly reasonable for him to have a venue to raise it.
I guess in particular, this is not a situation in which somebody has not sought to appeal the prior actions taken by the board. The board already did have a forum for an appeal of those permits, which was denied. So it's not appropriate to again raise something that has been subject to an appeal, and after the appeal was denied, to re-raise it again. There's nothing in the regulations that permit it. It's expressly different from what the regulations provide with respect to appeal. If they do not like what the Board of Health did as a result of that appeal, then they had rights to bring it to another forum, but they didn't choose to do that, and they shouldn't have the right to do and raise this again and again before the Board of Health just because they didn't like the decisions that the Board of Health previously made. If they need to sue the Board of Health, they should sue the Board of Health, but they should not adversely affect my client's property.
Fair enough. So Jim, I'm going to ask you kind of pause unless recognized by the board on the topics. And again, for the purposes of the record, my recollection from the outreach from the abutter previously was related to the management of the well upon drilling, which he wouldn't have had any ability to raise prior to the permit being granted and couldn't have been within the purview of the appeal process. So with that, I'll sort of transition to Mr. Moore to kind of raise the concerns you wanted to bring before the board today.
Thank you, Matt. That's the way that you said it was very eloquent. I'm not sure I could say it that eloquently, but our concerns were raised after the well was installed and are not the same concerns or not the same genre of concerns that we talked about back at the time that the well was being proposed for installation. So thank you for recognizing that and getting that into the record. I have here tonight Dennis Murphy, who's we've hired as counsel, and I'm going to ask him. We're juggling because we didn't know that we weren't going to be talking about open surface drains or water courses tonight. So I'm going to ask Dennis to quickly just chime in on the concerns related to the EHIR. with the concept that other A&R type developments in this town have resulted in people losing their water supplies, losing their potable water, and losing the ability to put potable water into their houses because of the development strategies when multiple A&Rs are done in a sequencing method. And
So Brian, just for a moment, I think we have to limit our discussion to the well pumping at 53 Farm Road. Because that was the issue, that's the agenda item that's on, and Matt, correct me if you're wrong, but I think we no longer have an application for the other lots, and so I think we can't address those issues.
I would say that sort of aligns with my piece. I think it's important for us. Yeah, Brian, I know you sort of raised concerns around that. I think that's a topic for tonight. But I would sort of echo Matt, if we don't have other parcels that have an application, I don't know that we have a basis to say we've sort of hit X, Y, and Z for triggering EHIR or something else from my point of view. But so I'd sort of ask that, you know, to the degree possible, you sort of confine your comments to the 53 Farm Road well installation.
I'll concede. I'm concerned because there are A&R lots which have been recorded at Middlesex Registry, numerous. So I guess that puts us down to the very last point. Is it possible to do, I've circulated a geologic
Screen share?
Yeah.
I'll stop sharing if you would like to share something.
I did a geologic cross-section. My name is Brian Moore. I live at 49 Farm Road. For the record, in addition to residing at 49 Farm Road, I'm gonna try to do this quickly so we get all on the record. I want to give obviously Jim time to rebut if he wants. My professional experience and qualifications include the fact that I am a registered professional geologist licensed in multiple states. I have a Massachusetts licensed site professional certification as well. I've been a practicing professional in the field of chasing, finding, locating, and cleaning up contamination for the last 30 plus years. In my career, I've been chasing them through soil, groundwater, surface water, sediment, bedrock, indoor air, subslab air, utility conduit air, and drinking water wells, and irrigation wells, and monitoring wells. Until recently, I also served as chair of the town's groundwater protection committee as elected water commissioner for this town. I believe these experiences make me uniquely qualified as I'm intricately aware of surficial and hydrogeological connections at these properties, including the geology cross-section, which I prepared and shared with everyone last Friday as I was supposed to. I also shared it with the applicant and mailed it to him, emailed it to him directly as well. I believe that my professional knowledge that I am sharing here tonight is extremely important for the board to weigh and consider during your deliberations on the matters that are in front of you related to this well. And now I'm going to share my screen and show you a geologic cross-section. Now in front of you here tonight, this is can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay. This is called a geologic cross-section. The top is a courtesy of CLAWE. Their original, one of their applications, which had a full comprehensive survey. Now the blue lines here from the top down represent the general drainage of surface water and groundwater along what I'm calling a water course from transect A prime to A. Thing below it's called a cross section or a fence diagram, which is if you split the earth open with a giant axe or wedge and we're able to view it from the side, you would see that this is what you would see in the surficial geology. Can you see the cursor moving where it says till?
Yes.
Okay. This is the bedrock surface to scale as provided by the well logs that are depicted on the plan. This is the 64 Farm Road well, which is the Slavins well. This is the well that was installed on lot 2A, which is 53 Farm Road by the applicant. And here's our well over at 49 Farm Road. There is a vertical exaggeration to this, so it's exaggerated for the purposes of, this is very typical to provide vertical exaggeration in geologic cross sections. Along the top here, you have this dotted line, which essentially represents the surface of Farm Road. And then you have this line here, which is essentially the elevation of the ground. And you'll see down here, I've depicted the drainage ditch that exists on the applicant's land right at the 49 Farm Road property line. And over here on the right side, I have to move everyone's head over. Over here, you'll see here's the pond that we've talked about up on 65. And within this superficial deposit, these little markers indicate what the head potential is for groundwater, meaning groundwater is always seeking elevation of equal kind. If you were to, as example, imagine a tube filled with water and you put your thumb over either side and then you drop your left hand down and you release your thumbs, the water flows out of it because of gravity. That's what's happening here. Gravity is pushing down on this water, forcing it through the pore space of the till, down along the bedrock surface in the direction of 49 Farm Row here. If you look, the Slavins well and the Moores well both have their, now everything here is public information. These well logs came from the Massachusetts DEP where people record their drinking water wells. If you look here, the Slavins water well elevation is within bedrock, as is the Moores. The applicant's well that was installed at 53 Farm Road by their own driller's log shows that groundwater was encountered only 6 feet below ground in the well. Now, as a practicing professional, I really wish that Lisa were here tonight because she's another Massachusetts LSP and could back me up on this, but Daryl probably could too. This is telling me that this well was not properly installed. This well was installed into rock, but the seal that is supposed to prevent overburdened groundwater from entering this well is not working correctly. Because if it was, it would be pretty much in the rock like these other wells in the neighborhood are. So this water, the water that's in this well is coming from this water in the overburden, which is subject to the 3 septic systems that aren't pictured here on the south side of Farm Road, or this septic system here, which services the 55 Farm Road property. And because this was intended to be part of the discussion of lots 3 and 4, their proposed septics, even though they've been withdrawn, I put them on here because they were part of the discussion. Here is the open surface drain along the wall. And as you see, this groundwater elevation here, which was measured in the test pits done by Claw and Deshang on the property, very closely mimicked the groundwater elevation found in this well here, which is supposed to serve drinking water to the 53 road parcel, 53 Farm Road parcel, lot 2A. Now, my concerns as the owner and the drinker, like here's my water right here, right out of my tap. I'm getting that from down here. When you install a well incorrectly into the bedrock, you are providing a conduit for bacteria and nitrates to enter into the bedrock aquifer, which is a different and considered to be a different aquifer than the overburden. And for that reason, my concerns are that because this well is improperly sealed, the applicant's pumping of it for 4 weeks or whatever it was during the period of December through January, essentially drew all of the nitrates and bacteria from 55 Farm Road septic down into the rock. And it's only a matter of time now before it appears in my well. And once it appears in my well, it's probably too late. Now we're talking about some kind of abatement is going to be required, and I'm going to have to litigate, and I'm going to have to spend more money on attorneys and more money on testing and more money on everything that up to, 2 months ago was just fine. And, it will also threaten the 3 wells that aren't depicted here, which are on the south side of Farm Road, also finished in bedrock. Now, the town of Sherborn has specific requirements related to overburdened wells that require them to be treated separately and permitted separately than a bedrock well. So if I had my druthers tonight, which I probably won't get, but I would very much like the board to consider getting this well properly abandoned by a Massachusetts licensed well driller and a new well installed in such a location that doesn't endanger my drinking water well, immediately downgrading of that location. And that's pretty much my presentation for this evening. I would really love to talk about this because I'm a geologist, and that's my living. So I would happy to field any questions anyone on the board might have about this matter.
Maybe I can start off, and I think I've got a question for either Jim Murphy or DeShang. My understanding is, or my impression is 55 farm is not currently occupied. Is that correct?
The existing house, are you asking?
Yeah, the sort of legacy house that was on 55 farm.
The existing house, I believe, does have a 10 family in it.
Okay, that's helpful. I'm sort of happy to have discussion for the board, but also if Jim, I don't know if you or DeShang have other comments you want to add before we discuss as a board, or if you prefer to sort of do that after we discuss. Do you have a preference?
Well, my preference is to make sure that I hear all the things that they want to misstate about my property so I can reply to all of them.
Okay. Fair enough. It
My
seems like,
client's property, I should say.
but fair enough. You know, so I guess I think there's some technical issues. I'm happy to sort of start off the board discussion. You know, my understanding is that an overburden well, in terms of the characterization and the regulations as it relates to town, would be more likely a historical well that we have many of, where these are sort of legacy systems where it is not a drilled into bedrock well. So I don't know that the assertion that the well is sort of either not installed properly or not functioning properly turns a bedrock well into an overburden well, even if there's evidence of water at that level. So I'd like to sort of think about that as a board a little bit. Does that sound right to folks, or do people have other opinions?
No, that's a good starting point.
Does that sound right to you, Daryl, in terms of the overburden versus bedrock distinction?
So am I on mute? All right, can you hear me? Okay, great. Yes, I think it's a reasonable starting point. And I'm just wondering, Brian, in your experience, could this be a phenomenon associated with artesian wells?
In my experience, you wouldn't see such a localized artesian condition. You know, there's big artesian and little artesian. I would say neither one of those apply in this condition because the water so closely mimics both the surface water, the groundwater that's already been measured on the parcel. And you would not expect that the 5 or 6 surrounding wells, all within a couple hundred feet, don't exhibit any other artesian conditions when that well is obviously, you know, purportedly being artesian. So it really doesn't make a sense from, you know, I don't have X-ray eyes. I can't see in the ground, but as a geologist, it doesn't make any sense to me now.
Okay, does anyone else have questions or comments?
I guess for me, part of the struggle is, or part of the period of reflection is kind of independent of the merits of Brian's description, which sort of I don't like, kind of holding that separately. I think it becomes a question of sort of what do we have jurisdiction to do and what do we have regulations to support. And so I think it's certainly valid and appropriate for Mr. Moore to be able to raise and share the concerns and for us to discuss them as a board to think about it together and thereby satisfy open meeting requirements. It's hard for me to figure out, even if we said, I agree with this and that recourse is required, I don't know that we'd be in a position to condemn the well and to say, you know, you need to reposition and re-drill the well. Although I wonder if we've had, I don't remember any other instance where we've had, at least in kind of the 5 years I've been here, concerns raised about the performance of a neighbor's well by an abutter. I know we've had concerns about sort of abandoned historical wells where people said, you know, there's this old well and we need to get rid of it, whether, you know, I think there was one on Maple Street. There've been various ones that we said we need to properly abandon this. And the concern that sort of those legacy systems can get forgotten. But I don't recall one where the kind of, you know, there's some assertion by a non-homeowner about the performance of the well. And so I can't think of a mechanism for recourse, even if we take the principle and say, hey, you know, that there is a concern here. I still think within our regulations, I don't remember anything that says, you know, we have to do X, Y, and Z to satisfy the conditions of a satisfactory dug well, other than the water quality measures, which the well ultimately satisfied.
And Mark or Ellen, probably Mark, do you have any comments? Has this come up before in Sherborn?
Yeah, this is Mark. This is the first time I've seen this come up, but I would suggest that if there is a concern on the seal of the well, then it could be cambered to determine if the seal is appropriate. Groundwater at the site was found usually around 10 to 12 feet from my soil logs. But again, if there's a question with the seal of the well, then you camber it to make sure the seal is appropriate.
But I think, again, because like in a typical scenario, if this were a question, like we've certainly had folks who had systems that they wanted to say, hey, I've got X, Y, and Z I'm trying to do on my home. What do I do? But I don't see any mechanism where there'd be a role for us to compel the property owner to inspect their well on behalf of an abutter. Like I sort of don't see that as being in our purview, but does that sound right to others on the board, or what are your reactions?
Yeah, it's a question I can't answer because we haven't had this come up before. And it's usually the homeowner who is going to be concerned about what they're going to be drinking. So they would raise the issue, but.
Well, and if I can, we always ask abutters to do regular well testing. And if there is a concern with nitrates, I'd suggest that maybe the suggestion would be that the abutters do a baseline test on their wells to see if they have any issues with nitrates at this point. And if not, if there is ever a future issue, they'll have a baseline to at least compare to.
I guess my other question is this, you know, again, this is a very specific and uncommon scenario. You know, again, like I think I've been, like my position is, I don't know that there's a role for us to say, hey, you need to do X, Y, and Z. I guess my question is there any role for getting guidance from DEP? Is this sort of in their wheelhouse? Again, typically I've thought of us as talking to them about septic system questions and replacement systems, but that's the only other area of guidance I could imagine to kind of weigh in or provide some more context as we face sort of a novel scenario.
Yeah, I think seeking guidance might be something that would be a regulatory change in the future for us.
I haven't heard anybody say, you know, hey, this is the recourse, or, I mean, I think that the concern feels appropriate. I think we'd certainly recommend to the property owner to consider doing those patterns of testing and inspection, given the concerns that Mr. Moore raised. And I, you know, certainly could see that being pertinent for, you know, whoever ultimately sort of builds and occupies and uses that well. But again, I don't know that I'm comfortable going past that at this point, unless, you know, there's some clear state level guidance or something else I'm not aware of, but like it's not in our regs. The criteria that are required for the performance of the well after drilling have been satisfied. I think that the next test will be when the home is built and the at the tap test occurs. Am I remembering that right, Mark?
Yes, there will be another test required, and that will be at the tap for the final water testing, which is the same testing that we do at the well when it's first drilled.
And Mark, am I correct that from a performance standpoint, we need to demonstrate volume and quality, but that we don't have criteria required for sort of, for lack of a better word, like, you know, seal integrity or those patterns, like that's.
No, that's correct. We do have the well drill form that and the well report form from the state that indicates the depth of the well, the casing, and you know, those are indicating that the seal was pounded into the ledge, and that's what's required to seal a well. The integrity of it, it's difficult. We don't have any regulations to indicate the integrity of that seal. It's just indicated by depth.
And just to be clear, like, and we also don't have those for any other new well in Sherborn. Like, it's not specific to this property. It's this is a limitation of the information we get.
That's correct, Matt. And the other thing I would note is that typically if we have seen, and usually it's a well that's been in place for a while, if they start to see issues with the well, we ask that they consider cameraing the well to see if the seal's integrity is in place and that there's no leaks coming in and so forth. And typically from the water quality test, you can get an indication if there is a seal that might be broken, and that's how it's done.
And so I see, Dennis, I see your hand up, and Arthur, I see your hand up. I just want to continue a moment or two more of discussion, and then I'll acknowledge you guys. Just in terms of the board, sort of before we go to other community comments, kind of any other pieces to raise, or are folks okay going to Arthur and Dennis?
Yes, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay, perfect. Dennis, I saw your hand first, but I don't know if it was up first. So we'll start with you and then we'll go to Arthur. Dennis, I see you talking, but I can't hear you.
Is that better now?
Yep,
Yes.
loud and clear.
Okay, yeah, it's a headphone problem. Sorry, Dennis Murphy from Hill Law on behalf of the Moores. And I just wanted to point out that section 5 of your regulations, I'm on page 20. And under the water protection 5.0 talks about you can't drill a well in an overburden, and it has to be set into the bedrock. And it does specify that the casing shall be sufficiently into bedrock and properly sealed to keep out the surface water or entry of any other surface or subsurface contamination. So you actually do have a regulation that addresses this exact phenomenon. And I'm sympathetic to the chair and the whole board that this is not something that arises on a regular occasion. But I think if I were the neighbor, I would want to camera it and make sure that the well was sealed. And by the way, if you read to the end, it actually says that where you're encountering bedrock within 20 feet, you actually have to be set at least 5 feet into the bedrock. So I think those things ought to be checked because we're talking about public health and real problems if there is contamination. And it sounds like just because Mr. Moore happens to be in this area, be an expert in this field, that we caught this. Most of these you would catch because you get a test and you wonder, well, why is this water testing so high? And you'd figure it out then. And so before we get to that point, before there is an abatable condition, I hope that cooperatively, without any formal action, there is a clear regulation that when the well is installed, it has to be put into the bedrock and 5 feet in and properly sealed to avoid this contamination. And my hope through the board is that the property owners will make sure that that's the case. And if it's not, somehow we'll fix it so that problem will not occur. Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis. Go ahead, Matt.
I just have a question for Mark. And so we do require these things. However, typically this would be documented in the well drill sheet. Is that accurate that this was performed?
Yes, Matt. I was just looking at the well drill form that's submitted to the state, and they do say that the casing was put in from top of ground to 38 feet, and they say that the ledge was found at 17 feet. So there's 21 feet of casing that's sealed into the ledge. They didn't use a sealant. Typically what they do is they pound the actual casing into the ledge to create that seal. And that's how it's required by the state code. So the well drill form that was submitted does indicate 21 feet of casing into the ledge.
So it sounds like per the well drill form, at least this was installed in a way that would be compliant with our regulations, which is how we would typically review this.
I'm sorry to interrupt. That is correct.
Okay, thanks.
I see Arthur up next and then Brian.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just wanted to say in respect to the chair's comments, and I'm not familiar with your regulations, so I'll put that out there at the beginning, but I would have to think that something that's within the Board of Health's purview generally, which both septic, drinking water are, and there's substantial evidence, which Brian has now given, that's so far really unrefuted. And even if it were, there would be a question of fact that it's something that would be beyond the board's inherent authority to get out in front of, and instead wait for the drinking water to be perhaps irreversibly or at least temporarily affected. I mean, we don't have recourse to other water, and to have something that the Board of Health is especially charged with protecting in this particular situation, in our maybe not unique, but our town where we have well water, something that's in the Board of Health's purview, to wait until there's actually an adverse health consequence to an abutter. I think there has to be something within the Board of Health's inherent authority to get out ahead of that and not wait. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Arthur. Brian, go ahead.
Thank you. Just two little brief comments here at the end. There are ways to properly seal. I believe your regulations use the word "and," which would indicate that it really doesn't matter how much casing you put into the rock. It still needs to be properly sealed from the overburden. So in such a case, you could put in 100 feet of casing. If it wasn't properly sealed from the overburden, then you would still be obliged to put in sufficient sealant or casing or something to keep that bedrock well sealed from the overburdened groundwater. I believe that's the way your regulations read. And one of the true ironies here is that with densely built A&R lots having potential added septics, new wells, all in very dense little areas, this is bound to happen. And this is one of the reasons why we have been raising the specter of EHIR since day one. And thank you for hearing us tonight.
Thanks so much, Brian. Jim, I want to be cognizant of time and give you an opportunity to respond to kind of any of the comments or discussion that you'd like to either add to or raise other issues. And if Deshang would like to kind of chime in, I sort of treat you guys interchangeably if that's appropriate from your standpoint. Consider yourselves both recognized as appropriate.
Well, first of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak a little bit about this presentation. However, first things first, the well was properly installed. There is no evidence that the well was not properly installed. It's completely speculative that there's going to be damage to Mr. Moore's well or drinking water. And as Mark said, the well driller complied with his obligations, filled out the form, submitted it, and it complied with the regulations. The well was tested and it passed, and it was sufficient for the agent to advance this for a foundation permit. So, this is again casting aspersions against one well on one property that happens to be next door to the Moores in a fashion that's completely unwarranted given the compliance that has already occurred and the permits that have already been granted and the work that has already been done. And there is nothing in the Board of Health regulation that allows them or permits them to just say, hey, the neighbor thinks way down many feet below ground that your well may not be properly sealed. So therefore, you, neighbor, have to go and incur costs and expenses of defending and proving a negative because the neighbor thinks that it may have, could have, is possible to have occurred, other than that mere speculation. They certainly have had the opportunity to test their own wells and to bring forward any information about their own wells. I haven't seen anything like that. But again, I would say that there's no authority in your regulations to take any action along the kind that they're talking about here at all. You know, I'm sorry, got some pop-ups on my machine here. I objected to this discussion. And I think having had the discussion, my objection to it even occurring is more than warranted. This is just a neighbor casting about to suggest to potential purchasers of the lot that there's some problem with the property in an attempt to damage its value for his own self-interest. And I don't think the Board of Health should be the party, the vehicle, or the shield for such action on the part of a neighbor.
Thanks so much, Jim. Are you all set?
I'm finished with my current statement.
Sounds good. You know, again, I think we've had some discussion. You know, again, may have some difference between members of the board. I think, you know, from my point of view, I think, again, not to sort of minimize Mr. Moore's points, but I think we can't apply a standard to this well that's different than what we typically do. And I think that the kind of, again, there's nothing that has demonstrated that the well isn't satisfactorily installed in terms of the regulations and requirements we have about documentation and performance. And I don't think that my own inclination is to take no action, but would sort of like to straw poll other members of the board for your position.
I would tend to agree. It seems like we have the standard documentation we get for installation of a well. We've done the first step of the standard testing we do with installation of a well. And so we're following our standards for testing suitability of a well. And I think it's hard to sort of ad hoc come up with different standards based on a theoretical issue. So I also agree. I probably don't think we can take any action on this.
And I would say I'm inclined to think that, since we don't have procedures, but we really haven't encountered this before. So I'd like to verify with Mass DEP if they are checking the well boring logs to look for this sort of difference in where the bedrock is encountered and where the water level is. And then if it was a less contentious situation, I'd just like to say that there's been interesting information raised. This might, since normally when people are purging their wells following any detection of suspected introduced contaminants during the drilling of a well, and Mark, correct me, I'd say that usually the pumping is from half a day to a couple of days, but there was a lot of pumping and maybe this is tied to that. So I think it would just be, I would make it a suggestion to the property owner that if they wanted to look into it or speak with their well driller to find some confirmation of what might be going on, I would recommend that.
Yeah, and if I can answer to that, Darrell, typically your well pump test is 4 hours. Any additional pumping is usually done to, in most cases, to cleanse out the water. They have the right to do that. And just another note is the well pump form the well drill form that I was talking about on the last page does show cement grout from 0 to 38 feet, either cement or bentonite grout. And that is on the last page of that state report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. Rebecca, do you have any other comments to make? You're currently muted.
I think that it's important that we pay attention to the advice that's being given by some of the experts in the room. I think we're all learning a lot, but it's important because we have shared natural resources, and I think that the impacts of these decisions are going to affect more than one or two people.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. So it sounds like in terms of follow-up steps, Daryl, and maybe would it make sense for Daryl and Mark to reach out to DEP just to see if there's sort of any guidance? Again, I think
I'd suggest Mark.
I second Mark, especially since he's on mute.
That's fine. I'd be glad to.
Perfect. And again, I think that I think the concerns are raised. I think one of the parts that I do want to reflect on the record is, again, I appreciate the points Brian raised, and I think hopefully signal the importance we assign to following up those concerns by going to the state to get more guidance. But I also want to be really clear that the well that's been pumped, that's been dug and installed, has satisfied the requirements we have for a well. I think that understanding more how to contextualize this information is there, but I don't want the characterization, nor do I think the characterization by the board is that the well is non-compliant. It appears to be compliant. And so I just want to make sure that that's kind of clear on the record. It's just, how do we tackle it when there's a question raised of this type in a pattern that's difficult than what we've seen? And how can the state help us understand the approach they'd recommend? But I don't know that that's a tacit endorsement to say, hey, we think this isn't proper. I think it's just to say, you know, the concerns that Brian raised, we want to make sure that we're doing our best to follow up and approach thoughtfully. Does that sound right to folks?
Yes, and I'd say, again, this is, you know, it's an interesting, unusual circumstance to have the water level where it is in the well, is what I took away from this. And for the long-term interests of the property owner who will be drinking the water, would be, you know, now might be the time to talk to the well driller about it and see if that explains the quite prolonged period of pumping that apparently was required.
Okay. So with that, I'll sort of close out this set of topics, recognizing we've got the variance hearing at 8 o'clock. And so it doesn't sound like we've got an agenda item for next week or for our next meeting on these topics. You know, again, if we get follow-up from Claire and we can briefly review that, that certainly would be reasonable to include, but we can add that sort of if we get it within that time frame. And so with that, I'll sort of, go ahead, Brian.
Thank you. I just wanted to bring to your attention, and I shared it through Ellen and Concom, and I shared it with your board as well, that the applicant did send a letter in saying that they were going to rip out the open surface drain if the town didn't do something about it within 30 days. Those 2 days from the notice that was issued from the applicant are 2 days from now. If the open surface drain, if you guys think that that's within your jurisdiction, you should be aware that the applicant has told the town that he plans to dig it out in 2 days' time. And that's in his own letter. So if you feel that's in your jurisdiction, you want to do something about it, you might want to say something at tonight's meeting before he rips it out.
I think that's out of scope for tonight. And we also are not the people responsible for the maintenance, installation, or removal of open surface drains. Again, I think, you know, look forward to whatever applications come, but I don't think we can talk about it tonight within the scope of 53 as the posted agenda item.
I guess I just would be able to tell you that the town did indicate by letter dated March 15th, 2022, that it is intending to cap or seal off the pipe in place from inside the catch basin, and that it's going to do that work. It can't do it within the next 2 days, but it's going to do it in the next several weeks, and that's from Sean Colleen, the DPW director. So the town has agreed to remove the pipe.
And again, I would say, since we said at the beginning, this is sort of out of scope for the posted agenda, we're not going to continue to discuss the open drain right now. And so with that, we'll close out the discussion on Farm Road.
But Matt, or Madam Chair, it was included in the documents for this meeting. So are we not?
It was the part you missed at the beginning, Rebecca, is that the applicant has withdrawn the 35 and 45, the 45, the 55 and 65 plans. So there's no currently pending plan to discuss the open meeting or the water course because those plans have been withdrawn by the applicant. So there's no outstanding plan for review. And so again,
does the town generally require any guidance from its boards when it does something like remove a drainage? Because I personally,
Rebecca, this isn't on our agenda for tonight.
I really truly don't think we can talk about it and be compliant with the open meeting law. And I really think we need to stop.
well, this is an open meeting, and I think that if
No, but it's not this is not a
It's not posted.
topic. And so again, I don't think it's appropriate for us to discuss it because it wasn't appropriately posted and noticed for that piece of the discussion.
well, if something's happening in 2 days, whose purview is it?
Again, I would say the open meeting law, I think, is pretty clear in terms of saying, this is not a Board of Health emergency. Beyond that, I would say in terms of, you've been on the board longer than I have. I don't remember anybody ever working to say, hey, we're doing X, Y, and Z with the management of drainage, other than that when that drainage is impeded by a beaver, in which case we get a chance to opine. But that's the only drainage issue typically that I recall that we've sort of had covered.
I think that's just a procedural question, because if drainage does overlap with our regs, whose responsibility is it when there's something that
again, I do not think that I'm happy to have that discussion. I do not think it's appropriate for us to have it tonight.
I agree. We can add it to the next agenda to generally discuss drains because it just doesn't fit with what we have for tonight.
So with that, Daryl, I'm going to pass the baton back to you for the 8 o'clock variance hearing for, I think, 100 April.
All right. Let me pull that up. And Ellen, have the green cards all been received?
Ellen, if you're answering, you're muted.
Yes, sorry, I was muted. We did not receive all of the green cards, but they did provide the post office printouts. Most of them showed that they were available for pickup at the post office. People weren't available when they tried to deliver, and they were available for pickup, and people just aren't picking them up. So I think that's adequate notice.
Okay. All right. Then, sorry, I'll go back. So then I will open the variance hearing for septic replacement at 100 Maple Street. And I believe I saw, well, actually, I don't know if I saw, did I see Jason? Or somebody?
It's Kyle Devenish from Outback Engineering. Jason
Okay, yes, I know I saw Outback, but it didn't seem like it was Jason. All right, so I don't know if there are any abutters present who might like to indicate, but basically what we'll do is the engineer is going to present the reasons that the variances are given.
Alan and Jane Rosengard at 104 Maple Street we're present.
Okay, great. So the engineer is going to present the reasons why, what circumstances are on the property that led to the need to request variances. The board will ask some questions probably about that. The agent, Mark Ora, might weigh in. And then if we haven't in our questions and discussion covered something that you're interested in, you'll have an opportunity to also ask. So I'm going to share the plans so that the engineer can point out. Oh, unless Kyle, if you would rather share the plan and do the arrows, otherwise I'll try and follow you as you speak.
If you wouldn't mind sharing it, I'm actually on my phone.
Oh,
which is not-
okay, yes, then it would be easier for me. All right.
And just for context, for the Rosengards, where are you positioned relative to this property? If you guys are able to see the screen.
So
We're
here's
to
me.
we're to the left.
Okay,
Okay,
perfect.
so over
in the
here.
Street view.
Perfect.
Or the
Okay.
west. So just
Perfect.
for north, the plan is oriented north as well. North is directly up. So
Mhm.
it looks like the Rosenthal's at 104 would be the
Oh, yeah.
the west.
Here you're
Perfect, okay.
identified. All right. Okay, take it away, Kyle, sorry.
All right. Thank you for your time. It's Kyle Devenish from Outback Engineering. Sorry, Jason couldn't make it. I know he's been working with Mark, and but what we're proposing is the replacement of an existing 3-bedroom house failed septic system. The interesting part about this is there's a well in the basement of the existing house, and it's centered on the lot along the frontage. Yep, right where the cursor is highlighting. And that creates some setback issues, which directly go towards our regulation variance requests. But what we've done, just a general layout, is we have a proposed 1,500 gallon 2-compartment septic tank set to the 50-foot minimum state requirement from the well, but it works out to 33 feet from the foundation. And then we have a 3-trench configuration field, which is up along the east property line, with reserve areas between, and impermeable liners around for breakout, with a boulder retaining wall to help with the grading, so we're not chasing the grade all the way down the hill, and some regrading of the rear yard, just to allow cover for the tank and access and all that. So I'll get specifically into the requests, if that's all right.
Well, let's just take a moment here. So does anyone on the board have any questions?
So I just want to make sure I feel like for the replacement systems, it's always helpful for context to make sure we understand sort of where the old system was in compliance. And it looks like that's just off the back of the house and in much, much closer proximity to the well. Am I reading that right, Kyle?
You're exactly correct.
And so essentially what we're doing is we're replacing a failed system, and in so doing are increasing the distance to the well at potentially some cost to the property line to the east.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thanks so much. I'm going to cheerfully go back on.
Okay, and I'll just highlight. So here is the arc of what kind of setback we want from the well before a septic system. So that does wipe out the entire front part of the yard. And it looks like there are wetlands back here. So there's also a desire to have setback from that. So
Yeah.
These are some of the key constraints I'm seeing on the property.
Yep.
Mark, do you have any comments? Oh, sorry. Who else?
Oh, I was just going to say, and where the wetlands are located as you mentioned, in relation to the well, that kind of decided where our replacement system had to go, trying to maximize setbacks to each of those.
Mhm.
And that is correct, Daryl. The constraints are the wetlands, the well, And the reason why the septic system has been put, I believe, 126 feet away from the existing well. The septic leaching field is downhill from the existing well.
Okay, and do the abutters or anyone else in attendance have questions?
Has there been any analysis done when you do the regrading in the back? If there's going to be any impact to the wetlands?
So we have proposed straw wattles at the base of the slope, base the majority of the slope, to protect the wetlands from any sedimentation, so that it doesn't run down the hill.
Same thing they did.
And Kyle, that takes place during the construction phase and until cover is established?
Yeah, that'll be before any groundbreaking happens, and then once stabilization has occurred, it will be pulled. So when grass starts growing over it and can hold.
And I just want to mention that the Conservation Commission has reviewed this plan and we received their approval on January 11th.
Okay.
And so if there are no other questions, maybe do we want to move to the requested variances?
Yes. All right. Okay, so what we'll do is sort of a streamlined version because people can read what the content of the regulation is and the variances that are being sought. So I will ask for a motion to grant a variance to section 10.2.
So moved.
Seconded.
And is there any other discussion?
I think my only comment is, I think every time we try to think about sort of what makes sense, and if you had to, like, this is a very zero-sum game where, you're either further from the well or you're further from the property line. And in this case, sort of prioritizing well distance makes sense. So that
And if
logic.
I,
Go ahead.
If it's not overstepping, just a note that the way the topography is shown, it's actually flowing down from the east abutters, which would be Button Ball LLC, and heading onto the site towards the wetlands. So it's not like would be sending any runoff that way to negatively impact. I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Kyle, because I was just going to bring that up, that I have asked that Jason detail that. So indeed, if a swale is needed, if the shedding of the surface water off this leaching area goes into the abutter's property, they need to put a swale to keep it on their property within 5 feet of the property line, since now they're asking to be only 10 feet versus 20. So I asked for additional detail on the grading on the lower side of the leaching field, just to indicate what Kyle just noted. Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you.
So Dale, I think I hijacked the discussion. Are we up to
No,
vote?
that's okay. That's what the gap between the motion and the vote is for. So are we ready
just to be
Oh.
clear, the
Mhm.
wetlands, the water is running east to west.
It's kind of, I would describe it, it's sort of east to north, but with a generally east to north, but kind of to the west. So it's coming from the north, the east side, and then heading to the northwesterly side.
So
Yes.
these are contour lines here. And you can see it goes from 86 feet to 84 to 82 to 80. So this is the downward direction. So is that what you're pretty much
So,
observed on site?
Well, our thought is we just want to make sure that we're not going to get additional water on our property. We have a pretty dry lot right now. And we
Yep.
just want to make sure that any changes that are being made won't increase the amount of moisture.
Like the wetlands behind 100 Maple Street are much wetter
Than our property.
than the wetlands on our property. And we just want to make sure that grading isn't going to change
Change
that
Mhm.
ratio.
Well, and Kyle, it sounds like from what you're saying, the sort of trend would continue to sort of follow the axis of the 100 Maple Street parcel, and we would not expect it to affect the 104 Maple Street parcel based on those patterns of flow. And again, I would say if the septic system is working properly, hopefully that this will perform better in terms of interaction with groundwater than the baseline state of affairs that's kind of physically closer to your property and that western edge of the property.
Right,
Yes.
and you will be further away from what the existing system was.
And if I can address their, I believe they had a question about sending the new grading, sending water toward, making their lot any wetter. Just to try to answer your question, the topography from your property or the Rosengard's property is also heading in existing state, heading over towards these wetlands. So it would be running from the kind of the south side over onto the east. So they're both sides of the abutters properties are kind of coming towards these wetlands rather than the 100 Maple Street property running off to their properties.
And that's fine. That's kind of what we thought, but we just wanted to make sure that that was the case. I mean, again, we're not engineers, we're not the Board of Health. We just want to make sure that we're not going to end up in a swamp.
Yeah, of course.
Kyle, it sounds like it's status quo. There's sort of a natural topography funnel that results in that area perhaps being marshier. And we don't expect the grading that's associated with the replacement system to change that baseline pattern.
Great,
Okay,
thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, everybody.
So Kyle, that sounds like the right question. Did I get it right?
Yes, yeah. That was perfect.
Perfect. All right. So it sounds like we've got a motion on 10.2. Does the board feel prepared to vote upon it?
Yes. Did we move in second?
I think
we
Yes, we already did.
Okay, then I will vote aye.
And Rebecca, you're up.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what's our alphabetical order? Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye.
And Daryl Beardsley, aye. And then we have another portion of section 10.2 for which a waiver is being sought. So do we have a motion to grant that waiver as well?
So moved.
Second.
Any other discussion? All right.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye.
And Daryl, aye. Okay, so we'll close. Oh, well, we're not going to close the hearing because I gather, Mark, there's another waiver that is.
Yes, there is one additional
Necessary.
waiver that they need to notify the abutters for.
But you
And
should
that's-
close this hearing because this hearing, they haven't asked. for-
Oh, because it's the application as received. Okay, yes. All
Thank
right,
you, Ellen.
so let's, okay, we'll close this hearing. I'll
Right.
not ask if the plan is ready for approval because there will be another variance hearing coming.
Yes, another variance hearing, and there were some deficiencies that the engineer and I have been communicating on. That's Jason Youngquist. And I expect he'll be submitting the new plan with the updated revisions, as well as the request and the additional waiver.
Okay, so the Rosengards can expect another letter shortly, noting that, and do we have a date and time for that?
It'll be April 6th at 7:50.
Okay,
Oh,
Seven-
sorry,
Zero.
I'm sorry, 8:50. It'll be 8:50.
850.
Yes.
Thank you.
And
Just jotting that-
what's the situation on the additional variance?
They forgot to ask for another variance that's needed.
And so I suspect, are we able to give the Rosengards a sneak peek about what that variance is so they can decide?
If I may, the additional variances, we have a requirement in our town that for any construction, you would need to make sure the groundwater is not found within the first 5 feet of material from the top of ground down to 5 feet. For repairs, this is a variance that we see quite often because systems that were built prior to our regulations, some of those homes did have groundwater within the first 5 feet of soil. So they'll be coming in for that waiver, and that'll be on April 6th at 8:50 p.m.
Perfect.
Great,
Thank
thank you.
Okay.
Right. So we've got that top, Daryl, we closed that out, correct?
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay. Let's see.
Thank you very much.
Have a good night, Kyle.
Yes. Yeah,
You
thank
too.
you, Kyle. Would you like to give the COVID-19 update?
I would say no news is good news. I think we sort of continue the transition. I don't have data sites to share, but sort of the general trends are all consistent with kind of decreased case rates. I think we're hitting a little bit of a plateau now. The per capita testing is about half of what it was at our, sort of more active baseline. So we'd previously been doing about the equivalent of 10 to 12% of the town's population undergoing testing every 2 weeks. Again, that's not specifically the 10% of all residents, but on a test per population basis, and that's now about 6%. I think that reflects the increased use of antigen testing, which will make all of those measures harder to interpret. And then the mask optional transition at the district sounds like it's gone very well so far. So we're sort of 9 days in, and no big issues or concerns have been raised. So I think, for this phase of things, so far so good.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And of course, my usual thing is I'm always reading international news, and Europe is starting to see a bit of a rise again. And we've often lagged that by some amount. So
I think
I'll keep an eye on that.
I think it's accurate. I think what we can expect is that, like, we are not done with COVID, and COVID isn't over. I think we're going to continue to see transitions where risk stratification becomes a bigger part of the story, as does the use of oral antiviral medications, which are becoming more and more available. So I think that the stories, the kind of experience out of Europe will be helpful. And then I think just further context as, as people get their second or third COVID infection, or their fourth or fifth vaccination, just sort of what a case means may also continue to evolve. So I think more to come, but I'll take the good days when I can get them. Like a 60-degree day in March, I can live with it. I don't mind. It might snow next week, but I'll take it today.
Okay. All right. Does anyone else have any questions or comments on COVID? Okay, then I noticed Marianne Panarella is here. So how about if Mark, is that okay if we take 176 Lake Street?
Yes, by all means.
Okay.
And Mark, as I recall, the issue last time was the basement location relative to the test pit location. Am I remembering
Yes.
that right?
That's correct, Matt. And if we zoom in over to the plan on the house, you'll see that they reestablished the basement floor to be at 215 elevation. Groundwater is at 213 at that location, and that gives the 2 feet that we require within our regulations. So they're 2 feet from groundwater off the basement floor. Previously, they redesigned and lowered the basement floor, so now it's fine.
And then, Mark, the other thing I was just hoping you could double check. I sort of did Matt Vitale's informal measurement strategy, but it is suspect in many ways. At least on my look, it looks like the position of the proposed well in the driveway is about 30 feet, so exceeds our 20-foot setback, but just wanted to double.
That is correct. It's 24.9 feet from the driveway.
Perfect. And it looked like it met the property line setback as well. That was my only other, at least for me, question on the plan.
Yeah, that is correct. It's 37.9 feet from the property line.
Perfect. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, any other questions from anyone? All right, so Mark, are you recommending approval?
Yes, I am.
Okay, any, oh, I guess no conditions. It's this, well, conditional to garbage grinder or anything on this?
That is correct, Darrell. They are not
Okay.
designing for a garbage grinder, so they'll need to do a deed recording.
All right,
Let me just double check that. I looked at this plan a couple weeks ago, so let me just make sure I'm accurate on that. And that would show up in the design flow. I believe it's being requested that they do a garbage grinder deed restriction, and I just have to find it. If you can give me just 1 second.
yeah,
It's in the general notes on the plan.
That is correct. It's designed for 660 gallons for a 6-bedroom. That is allowing for the bedroom flow only, and they do require the need for a deed recording before the plans can be released. Thank you.
okay,
But I believe since this is a revision to a previously approved plan, I don't have the file with me, but I am pretty sure they would have done it because
okay,
Mary Ann had received the previously approved plan.
And that's fine. If they already have a deed recording, then the plans would be released. We can check that within the
Yeah.
file.
Yeah.
Easiest condition ever.
all right. So how about if we have a motion to approve this revised plan, subject to confirmation of having already received the deed recording?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any other comments? Okay. Matt?
Oh, sorry. Matt Beaver's eye. It'll take like a year for me to get used to it.
Yeah.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye.
And Daryl Beardsley, aye. Okay. Believe we had another one, 59 North Main, Mark, and I see that Peter Bemis is here.
Yes, on 59-3, Unit 3, North Main Street, we received a building proposal, and Peter's here, I'm sure, to help out with the review. We did invite the applicant. Peter is the applicant's designer. The review was for basement rooms. If the board remembers, we had 59-9 a month ago or so. This request is a little different from the other one we had, where they're adding a bathroom as well as kitchen cabinets, refrigerator, freezer. There you go, right there, and a full bathroom. So with that said, it looks, even though it shows it for the use of a treadmill, that's what that little square thing is in the middle. It does have a sofa. It has a treadmill. It has a little kitchenette, I would call it. No sink except for a utility sink, but there's still a sink in that area. So I brought this to the board's attention based on the fact that this may be above and beyond just a basement room, the way I see it, because it has a kitchenette, I'll call it for now, with a utility sink and a full bathroom.
Right.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
So again, I'd say, Mark, that was my reaction too. And I think the previous guidance we've gotten is, does a change at, sort of a 40B reflect a new bedroom using our definition? And so our definition as it reads is any room not equipped as a kitchen on any level that has a door leading directly into a bathroom with a tub or shower is considered a bedroom. So this would seem, again, we can sort of put whatever the pieces we want are, but the regulation sort of says wherever it is, if it connects that way, it's a bedroom, which seems like it then needs to go back to ZBA to approve based on the guidance we got for the prior discussion.
Yeah, and that's what I was hoping the board would do. And that's my suggestion to the board, is that it go to ZBA for their review.
Hi, my name is Gene Katz. I'm the owner. You guys hear me?
Yes, actually, I'd like to make one comment, Jean, before, just wait a moment.
Sure.
So here's the one complexity I see, is that when the full bath is directly off of a room, that's one consideration, but this reads somewhat as a hallway. And because there's another room here and close to the stairs. So this is pretty murky to me. It does read somewhat like a studio apartment. And so that's a little concerning, but that's, I just didn't know what other people thought about this hallway versus directly off of a room.
Could I clarify, please?
Gene, we're totally happy to recognize, but you have to be recognized by the board. And so what we'll typically do is kind of do our conversations, and we're at a break point, we'll recognize you. And so
there is some misinformation in terms of the ownership. I'm the current owner of this property.
Okay, no, I'm not misunderstanding that, Gene. We look at a lot of these plans, so we're just trying to analyze this in the context of how we look at all properties. We try to apply the same rules to them, and that's what we're working through right now. So we just need to kind of finish out that thought.
Can I just kind of explain some of what you're looking at?
Gene,
you've interpreted things as being kitchenettes, which is not the case.
Hey, Gene, we just kind of want to finish talking first.
Okay.
So we get to finish our piece, and then I promise we'll pass the baton to you. But the way it works is like, we kind of have that discussion, and then we'll invite, like, we totally get that you've got feedback and clarification, and we'll welcome that. But we just need to sequence it properly.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it.
So I think the comment I was going to make is my first review of this is that it looks like it sort of meets our definition of a bedroom, in that is sort of an open area that connects directly to a full bathroom, or 3/4, I guess. I don't read that back room as a kitchenette. I mean, it looks like, that looks like sort of a mechanical room with an extra fridge or freezer, which is sort of a common basement thing. I guess the mechanical room's on the other side. I can't tell. Is that a sump in the corner? I can't tell what that round thing is.
Is that a question for me?
It might just be a question for zooming in on the plan.
It gets blurrier as you get bigger.
That doesn't help. Okay. So we'll sort that out. But I think for me, I don't view that as a kitchenette. So I would also agree. I think that's probably not it. But that also sort of pushes it more in the direction of this is a bathroom connected to a room. And so I might think it would be considered a bedroom by our definition.
And I would say for me, the piece that drives that is the fact that it's a full. If this were a half bath, I think it would be a non-issue. I think it's a fact that it's got a shower, a tub is what triggers our regulation. Yeah, I agree. I think if the shower were gone, it would be no question. I mean, it would be sort of easier to avoid calling this the bedroom, but as it is, I think it meets our definition. And again, I think, Daryl, correct me if I'm wrong, in terms of the sort of decider for it, if we said we think this is a bedroom, it would then go to ZBA, since it's a 40B project, to make that final determination kind of in the context of, okay. So we're sort of figuring out, is this something that can be approved versus it goes to ZBA, who may say, hey, this doesn't look like a bedroom to us. We don't think that regulation applies, or yep, it does. And so you can't. And if I may, just a point of information, Peter Bemis indicated to me just by a text that he is not involved with this property, 59-3. He was actually here for 176 Lake Street. So just so the board knows, he's not involved with this property.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So maybe if there's not further discussion for the board, they just, okay, I see Jean. Are we good to pass the baton to Jean to sort of clarify?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. All right, Jean, fire away. Thanks for your patience.
Thank you, Matt. First off, that space where you see the hole in the ground that says sump, the builder provided a hole in the ground for a sump pump should it ever be needed. It's just an empty hole in the ground.
Okay, that's helpful. I got one of those too. Go ahead.
The rest of that space where the utility sink and the fridge and the freezer are, mechanical space that's being used also for storage with shelving. Those are not cabinets. Those are plastic shelving. Yes.
So that sounds like it might be sort of almost unfinished space by the way we usually talk about it.
It's absolutely unfinished space.
Okay, so like exposed insulation on the ceiling and stuff like that.
Exactly. I have no intent to finish that space at all, other than putting what we call the pantry You know, it's where we store all kinds of extra, you know, food and laundry stuff, you know, the cleaning stuff. That's what that space is for. Not
That's
to
helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
not to mention the Richardson's frozen yogurt. The
Now you're making
bathroom,
me hungry.
the bathroom, yes, the intent there is to put in a full bathroom with a shower, a sink, and a toilet. The room itself, which is, as you can see, connected by a hallway from the toilet area, from the bathroom area, is primarily exercise space. The intent is to put up a TV on the wall that's on the right-hand side. And, you know, other than that, you know, it's a place for the grandkids to go hang out and for us to not be able to hear them. So it's not intended to be used as a bedroom, but, you know, it's intended to be, you know, have an accessible bathroom for us older folks who like to use the treadmill and sometimes need to rush to a restroom.
So I think as often comes up with these things, it's less about sort of your particular intended use, but we have to sort of act on what any potential future use might be.
Long-term use. Yeah, I do understand what you're saying.
So I would say, I think for the, you know, my 2 cents is, I think, I hear everything Gina's saying, and now I also really want frozen yogurt. But I think that sort of, at least in the plain language of the bedroom count regulations, meets the requirement for a bedroom. So I think, you know, sort of by that measure, based on our previous guidance, seems like it needs to go back to ZBA to sort of make the determination. And I think, Gene, that kind of where it's getting stuck for me, at least, is that because there's a shower there, that's really what changes things. And it may be ZBA will say, nope, don't agree with the board. You know, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, or we're not going to treat it as a bedroom. But I think that we have to be consistent to Matt's point about, you know, this is what our rule is. And if we don't do it for this property, then it sort of undermines our ability to apply those rules in other properties. Even if you have a specific pattern of use that wouldn't be problematic, we have to be able to say, this is what the rule is, and we applied it. The same for a family of older adults or a family with young kids or whatever. We sort of have to apply the rule the same.
I understand and fully
And-
appreciate that. Thank you.
So the issue is, I do agree, especially with this being more of a utility space. So that means it's probably usually closed off. So then this is, you know, a room with a direct access to a full bath. So whether, if you want to keep the shower there, then we would, again, kick this back to ZBA, telling them that we see it as an additional bedroom from how we evaluate properties.
Okay.
If you could live without the shower there, then it would be probably a different conclusion by us.
So you know, being a novice in all of this kind of stuff, what is the next step for us?
So I think for Eugene, the sort of, for that branch point, if you said shower's negotiable, then, you know, sort of update the plan, take out the shower, and I suspect the board would approve it based on other approvals that have happened at 59 North Main in that development. You know, I think without a shower there, it doesn't trigger a regulation and falls within the guidance. It says this would fall within the deed recording. Again, we have to see the specific plan to approve it. But I would say as a general statement, you know, it would likely be approvable. If you say the shower is really important to us, then it would go back to the ZBA. I know there was some discussion about at what point there was a condo association and sort of where that transitions in terms of who's the party going to the ZBA. Is it you? Is it the builder? Is it the condo association? And who's sort of functioning in that capacity? Daryl, do you remember? I don't remember the punchline for that in terms of.
Well, ZBA will work that out. I don't think it's fully into the hands of a condo association just yet.
And so can Mark send a memo to the ZBA and include Mr. Katz on it to sort of say, hey, these were the issues that were raised, and kind of pass the baton to them that way? So that Mr. Katz kind of connects with somebody on the ZBA side and can kind of carry it forward, since he's not sort of not working with the builder on it, to then have them give him some guidance about next steps. Or
Yes, I
that would
guess,
be-
Jean, if you're still, up in the air about whether you do or don't want the shower, then yes, that would be the best thing to do next.
All right, is to reach out to the zoning board.
Yes.
Yep, and so Mark, would you be able to just send a memo to the ZBA? in
Yeah,
terms of-
usually what I could do, Matt, is usually chair to chair is how we handle board to board. So usually Darrell would reach out to the ZBA, but what I already did is sent myself an email to update the building application, electronic building application, to indicate this application will need ZBA review. That's up to you, Darrell, but that's usually the protocol when it's
I mean, that's what we did for the last one at 59 North Main. So I'd be happy to send a brief note to the chair of the ZBA.
Okay.
And I'll update the building application.
Okay.
And does that all make sense to you in terms of the next steps?
I think so. How can I send along my email information to you?
I
Is
think,
it on? Just a quick question on the building application. Are you listed as the applicant with your email on that? Because that's where we can obtain that.
I've got a feeling it was my contractor who.
Oh, okay. You may want to send us your email then, so we can keep you in the loop.
Okay, and who should I give me? Can you give me the email address to send that to?
I would suggest just send it to the general address, health, HEALTH @sherbornma.org.
And this is Ellen. The building application does show the owner of record as HP Sherborn LLC.
Yeah,
So
that information is incorrect.
Then that should be updated with the building department. You should contact, ask for Jeannie Guthrie in the select board office about updating the building application.
I'm kind of surprised that it shows that information to begin with.
and I think
Hopefully they can figure that out for you.
We sort of don't generate it as far as I know. And so it sounds like for next steps, Gina will email Ellen at the health email address that Mark provided. And then the follow-up with Jeannie Guthrie in the select board office is going to be with Eugene, and you should be able to just find that and kind of Jeannie's contact info just on the Sherborn town website under the select board section.
All right, so it's health@sherbornma.org.
Yep, and that gets you Ellen. She's the wizard behind the curtain.
Okay.
All right, have a good night, Jean.
Thank you very much.
And I
Okay.
see
I
Nathan
was-
Kitchington. Oh, sorry.
Yep.
Who I think is here for 36 Ash Lane.
Yep. Just getting ready with that. I'm
I
trying
need
to
to-
decide.
I need to step away for just a second, but I see Rebecca, there are still 3 here, so we're okay if I step away for a second?
Yes.
Yep.
All right, I'll
yes.
let you know when I'm back. Sorry about that.
Okay. I'm going to start with just to set the stage and rule some things out, start with the pool house floor plan so we can all remind ourselves of that. And let's see. Okay.
That's
So
not the
here-
current plan, Darrell.
That's not the current plan?
No,
This is what was in for the pool house?
I think we've got, I think we may have sequential plans. Or Nathan, do you want to share your
This
screen?
was received 3/14/2022.
And then.
then I sent the
Building
wrong one.
inspector also submitted plans that he said are current with his comments on them. So if I added those also. So if you look for that.
Okay. Let's see.
And Nathan, are you in a position to share your screen?
I am. I'm going to try and find it for you right now.
Okay.
So, let me see where it's at.
I have 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 4 photos. pool house floor plans, let's see, also says 314.
I might have sent you an older, a wrong version. So very well, could have done that.
Okay, so have you found something I could stop sharing and allow you to share?
I'm looking right now, so let me see where
Okay.
this is at. And I apologize. It's all it is it's remove the room. It's really just a it's basically a veranda now, or a oh shoot, I sent you the wrong one. Man, gosh darn it. This is what happens when you try and work when you're on vacation. All right, why don't I dig that up, and why don't we skip the pool house, because the pool house is a non-issue because it's not even a room. It's just an open, it's basically just an open deck with just a bathroom and a mechanical room. So that room is not even, there's not even a room anymore. So,
Okay, and frankly, if the issue was going to be if they were screens truly and not windows, and it
no,
was
it's not.
unheated,
It's
then
completely open. Yeah.
okay.
It's
So
completely
either
open.
way, so
And that was already approved, and that was already approved 7/7. So we added that as a room. That was added as a room to the last meeting, and that really wasn't even the issue that brought this meeting about.
Right.
This was kind of a recap. So
Mhm.
this was more about just some slight revisions to the main house, no changes to the barn.
Yeah.
And
So if the pool house is moot, why don't we just have Daryl?
yes, no, I just wanted, I thought it would be so fast, like less than a minute.
No,
to
well,
look
and
at a pool house, but
it should have.
that was
It
wrong.
should have been. It's totally my fault. I gave you the wrong. I gave you the wrong plan.
All right, and just quickly, let's see if the barns can go quickly.
Yeah.
The
No
issue
changes
here
to
is
the
there's a room downstairs connected
There's
to
no-
a full bath, and then there's an upstairs room, which is kind of funny because usually for second floors, that's the bedroom.
For clarification, there's no changes to this. This is just kind of,
Yep.
we just wanted to kind of remind the board of everything that's already been, decided last meeting. We added a bath, we added a shower back to this, made this one of the bedroom counts, and removed one from the house. But
Yep.
but we're not seeking any additional changes. This is just a recap of what was already done. So there's two rooms here, one is a bedroom.
Yes, and I'm just looking for why I'm not seeing the office that I saw earlier. Anyway, so here's the office upstairs, and then here's the room that we just looked at. Okay, so then to the main house. And I don't have the annotated version that the building inspector, I guess I could pull that up, although I wanted to pretty much work off of your official plans, because that's one thing I'd like to see is get it cleaned up for our records and coming directly from you.
And that is this one. Chris had forgotten that we had already met back in July about the loft area and about all this, because Chris has been with me on day one and has been through all the iterations, and he had forgotten that we had already come to you guys with the main change, with the bedroom change and the loft area for bedroom 3 and such. So, we'd already spoke about it. I said, well, we'll just go to the meeting and just, go through it anyways. But that was kind of why his email was more alarming than really what it should have been, because he about that.
Yeah, I think he felt that this was much more finished space was the main issue in here.
Well, he didn't see that marked as storage on the original plan. So I granted that wasn't marked storage, but that space is completely attic storage. It's just we added that little catwalk so that for symmetry, and also so that they could get in, have a little bit. They didn't have to get on their hands and knees in order to access the storage space.
Okay, and what would be, we'll see what other folks think, but it would be good to have, I assume there's a wall here? Is that?
Yep.
Okay. To have it more clear, because I know you're layering between what's down below and what's above, but that does kind of confuse it for the purposes of us clearly identifying the spaces and not having any walls. I mean, I know it says knee wall, And then from the photos,
It's not even a knee wall. Can we just go look at the picture? I really don't
Yeah,
even see why this is even
which
there's three
photos?
pictures.
Yeah,
three
there's 1, 2,
pictures.
3, and 4. Which one first? One?
I'll try one. I mean,
Oh, you know what? This is not, hold on, I have to share a different screen. Are you seeing that?
Yes.
Yes.
No, it
that's only
paused.
that's only a partial picture of it. It's only partial. For some reason, it's way cropped right there.
Darryl, can you scroll down to the, at least in the picture I'm looking at, I see a lower half that has this sort of railing in the edge of that space.
That's it. That's all that's in the photo of this one.
Can I try sharing from my screen to see if we
Yeah,
can
do.
All right. I think we got at least a 50-50. Let's see how it goes. Are you guys seeing the screen right now?
Yeah, that's better. And I can see it on my own, but that makes it clear in my mind.
Yeah.
And Nathan, can you just orient us to what we're sort of looking at here as it relates to?
So we're above the mudroom right now. And so before, if you like right where your arrow is, go back to the right side there.
Yep.
Go move to the right. Yeah. So right there, if you move that forward to where the wall was, that's where we had a little access door to get to this attic. I want to remind the board, we have no basement in this house. So the only storage that these people have for this monstrosity of a house is this attic space and the one behind it above the garage.
And
so we had a little, so we moved the door over, give them a little clip door there in order to access it. So we created this little, we brought the catwalk over to the left, kind of as a U shape, more for symmetry, but also to give them, be able to, they can walk in that little clip door. And Nathan, you can see there's got.
Am I highlighting the door here? There's sort of a triangular shape to the top of it?
That's the new little attic clipped doorway.
Okay.
So I think you guys can see that there's no, it's not a legal door. There's not a window in the space. There's nothing that even constitutes that is ever can be or will be a room of any kind. It's strictly storage. And then it also, we have a cut through the roof to the left side, which leads to storage above the master. So this is strictly, by all intents and purposes, an attic. So.
I think that's helpful to see. Nathan, is it helpful to pull up any of the other pictures, or does this?
I mean, it gives, inside you can really, you can see that it's not, what.
And so this is them looking at the back.
Yeah, that's that's looking at it from inside. Yeah.
And so we sort of have the catwalk on the outer edges, and this is a doorway access. And if I understood before, the previous access was here, but you decided
you're going to have a little
wasn't the preferred approach, so we expanded that to just give us.
That's right.
No,
it was one of those things where it was built and they're looking at it saying, this isn't going to work. Can we, how can we get ourselves in there a little bit better? So.
And is this the view of that space from below?
Yes.
We're sort of looking up from the first floor. This is
correct. That's the little catwalk. Yeah, that's the extension of the catwalk we added. Correct.
Perfect. And then this is the view inside, and the door would be on my left-hand orientation here.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Do folks want me to go back to any of the pictures?
I don't need it. I think it's much clearer now than whatever we looked at last meeting.
Perfect. All right. With that, I'll stop sharing. So I guess for me, that makes it, I think the part I found hard with the plans is I think the house is going to be really lovely, but it's just really different than the sort of colonials that we usually see. So the mental
right.
of kind of getting into that. So I would say kind of both with that pattern of access and the structure of the room, I think to Nathan's point, that looks and feels like attic storage to me. And as we sort of consider the roof lines, there's no real exterior access. This is all contained. Like, again, it's an attic and a novel architectural form for our area, but it sort of looks and feels like an attic to me. Does that sound right to folks?
Yeah.
Yes, I'd agree. It would just be good if the plans could be clear about where the outer walls are, that this is all storage space. You said that there was going to be another door here, I believe, leading into storage above the
It's
master.
not a door. It's not a door. It's just an opening in the roof, in the ceiling. So it's not an official door.
And so Nathan.
Oh, okay. So
Okay.
it's access from the master bedroom?
No. There's no access from master. We would have preferred to have had a walk, just do a pull down stair, but there was nowhere to put it. So this is where all the storage is going to be, is leading from that space. So.
And Nathan, I thought you'd mentioned some kind of storage above the master bedroom. Can you help? Did I catch that right, or did I miss it?
It's just all this area here, that whole area on the left side.
Here?
There's some space up there. There's some space up there where it's storage as well. Where the mechanicals are, it's strictly attic. We have the mechanicals up there, and
okay.
The air handlers there.
Okay, so it's unfinished, truly unfinished, whereas I guess there are plans to finish the other storage.
No, the other one that cannot be finished. All we're putting on there is drywall. That's it.
Okay.
Okay.
On the space, are you talking about the space above the garage?
The place with the magic door, I think.
This one and this one.
And so that
the magic door, no, that's staying completely unfinished.
Okay, perfect.
All unfinished.
Okay.
I would say sort of with the more clarity with the sort of expert walkthrough, it passes the gut check for me. Does that sound right to others?
Yeah, and the lack of windows is a big point.
And also,
I'm not sure what this is though, right here. Door, window, hatch?
That's a window. That's a window. That's all. Yeah, that's all original. Yeah.
Perfect. And so what's our sort of outcome? Do we need to vote to approve?
Well, there's one other small minor change in the unfinished loft we had. In the finished loft in bedroom 3 on the right side, if you want to scroll to the right, we added 2 closets. So to this bedroom. So that was the only other, and we changed from a circular stair to a straight stair. So that was the only change to this finished loft area off of bedroom 3, which you're looking at now. Okay. So if you recall, just to remind the board, on 7/7, we had the meeting where this was confirmed that although again unconventional, that finished loft, because it had no access to, you can't get it to any other place except through bedroom 3. It's just an extension of bedroom 3. So bedroom 3 is just large, and so all we're doing is adding closets to bedroom 3, which didn't even have any closets in the original plan.
Okay. All right.
I think at the end we're fine, and the none of this changes the room count from the plan we approved.
Correct.
Right. So Mark, do you have any other questions?
No, I think it's been cleared. So basically, I think the way you were starting it off, Darryl, was doing a room count. So no rooms in the pool house, 2 rooms in the garage barn. And then in the actual house, we have the master bedroom and the other 3 bedrooms. So there's 4 bedrooms there, plus the living room, the family room, and the kitchen. So in the main house, I count 7.
Correct.
So we end up with 9 rooms, which is allowed. So you're maxing out is all I'm trying to indicate here, with bedroom count for the 5, as well as with room count. Because your 9 rooms, the 2 rooms in the barn and the 7 rooms in the house.
Yeah, we've actually reduced, because like I said, the last meeting we had, the pool house, we had a room there, and that's been removed. So
Yeah, that would
So
have
we're back-
created a 10th room, which if that ever
Right.
does come to fruition, you would have to seek permission from the board because you can only go up to
Yeah.
9 rooms on a 5-bedroom house, a 5-bedroom septic.
No, they could go up to
Good
11
point.
rooms on a
Yeah.
5-bedroom.
Oh, I'm
septic.
sorry. I'm thinking 4. That is
Okay.
correct. So you could have to.
No, no problem.
Phew.
Yeah, no, we,
Thank you.
we
And they
understand
have
the
5
procedure.
bedrooms. They,
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah, we have.
yes, they do.
It
They
would not
went
be a
under-
bedroom. but right.
This all started as a repair to the existing house from 4 to 5 bedrooms. So yes, you do have 5 bedrooms. Sorry about that.
Right. No, we're with you, Mark.
So it sounds like we've got resolution.
okay. All right. Well, thank you for coming in and filling in the details so that we could
No
not
problem. We just want to make sure.
glean
that we're-
from the
that we-
plans before.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, Nathan,
So,
have a good night.
okay.
All right.
All right,
Thank
thank you guys. Appreciate it. All right, bye-bye.
All right. Let's see. I think, just want to make sure, yes, I think we're up to
Minutes?
Dr. Honeywell. Dr. Honeywell hasn't presented yet.
Because Matt could get called away and we'll have a quorum issue. And so I think we should
Yes.
do.
Right,
Dr.
so let
Honeywell.
me just let folks know. So we were advised by the town clerk that the rules for this sort of situation where even though Rebecca's a board member, she has a citizen's petition before the town warrant article. And so she's going to be presenting to the board tonight. So she can make the presentation, but then she needs to recuse herself from discussion among the board. Certainly we'll probably have questions as we go along, but she'll need to recuse herself from the board's discussion and also if there's a vote to be taken from any vote. So the other thing I've asked Rebecca is since, I mean, she's been doing presentations at other boards and committees, but this board obviously is intimately involved with the topics. And so I asked her to focus in on the specifics about the proposed warrant article, the changes that would be made specifically, what would be, you know, what the meaning would be. Sorry, I'm admitting somebody, and what the actionable items would be as a result. And Rebecca, I don't know if you have, if you want me to bring up the text or if you would like to share something separately.
Oh, it doesn't matter. I have it. I kind of, because I had a full day of clinic and then my son is in the ER with acute appendicitis and I'm on call and I got called at like 6:30 for a consult. I don't have a new slide presentation, so we can just skip over stuff that's here, but hopefully the good news is that we don't have to educate the board because everybody's familiar with the issues. But
okay, so I've just put up the article.
Sure. Can I share this, what I have here?
Oh,
Is that okay?
It's different?
It's the same, but it has a little more information because I know not everybody in the audience is as informed, but it doesn't go, it's not the same presentation that I gave to the planning board. So I promise I'll try not to go into too much detail because I know you know everything. All right, so let me just share this. If I can do this right. Wait, sorry. Uh-oh. How do I get out of here? Oh, this, I'm actually not signed in on this computer. Hold on. Can I sign into the meeting from this computer? Just take a second.
Yeah.
Okay, because then I have two computers going.
All right, actually, while you're doing that,
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll just give a little background then.
Right, that's here anyway.
Okay, for what kind of a little bit of where we stand now. So obviously the Board of Health has regulations for both water supply and septic and other things, but right now we're going to be focusing on water and septic. The regulations that we have, we either follow state regulations to some degree, the Title V. However, Sherborn has some additional regulations in place, and that is, hold on, okay, and that is because the state Title V regulations are a minimum requirement, and they are to apply across the whole of Massachusetts, and that can include towns that are mostly sewered and only have some septic systems in more remote areas. It can apply to towns that have a public water supply, and therefore you're not co-locating septic and well on the same property. But in Sherborn, we are doing that, and so extra precautions are appropriate for the town, and that's why there is flexibility for each municipality to evaluate their situation and regulate accordingly. Then on the water supply side, the state explicitly regulates what they call public water supplies, which doesn't always mean that they're public the way you'd think about it of serving an entire town. There are also commercial establishments that, or corporate office buildings that are located somewhere where there isn't a public water, there isn't a municipal water supply. Then they may qualify to be a public water supply that is privately owned, but they still have to follow all the regulations of a public water supply. But for us, we fall below the thresholds that trigger that requirement for most of the properties in town. And so the state explicitly passed on the authority for regulating water to the municipalities. They provided model regulations that towns could use, and I believe Sherborn's was largely based on one of those model regulations. So we also have a few extra things that are more stringent than what you would find even for a public water supply. So we have a zero tolerance for volatiles, for example, for qualifying a well. So there are required tests before people put in wells, both for yield and for quality, and where they're located, how they are relative to other things. And then I think that's the general background. And we've also, to some degree, talked about gaps that we want to fill, but those gaps have largely been resulting from the fact that when DEP set up the regulations for well and septic, in both cases, they had sort of the small scale, which would be us, in one, to one side, and then they had requirements once certain volumes, sizes were reached, that there would be increased levels of treatment, for example, for wastewaters, where an actual treatment plant with multi-step processes and certified operators and routine testing would be taking place. And I would say even through the, and let's take, I'm trying to think of who I would choose in town, but any kind of multi-family developments in town.
So like
probably through the 80s or 90s, those sorts of places would usually just default to doing what they called a packaged treatment plant, which was a small version of a treatment plant. But in recent years, folks have looked at both the water supply and septic as something that they could squeak in under the requirements of what were the higher level regulations that Mass DEP has for larger systems. And so that's where we're, and both the private, single family septic system and Title V regulations were oriented towards small systems. They weren't oriented to something up to 10,000 gallons. And so that's kind of the gap that we have. DEP recognizes that that's a big area to span from an ordinary septic system of 600 gallons a day, roughly, up to 10,000 is a big range to cover with the Title V design. So that's an issue. And then on the water supply, in some ways, our regulations are more stringent than some of the PWS requirements. Like we have a larger protective radius around our wells than what the equivalent would be in a public water supply system of comparable size. So, which is only 100 feet. We have at least 125 feet up to 175 feet. So, all right, are you ready, Rebecca? I was filling in time.
Thank you very much. Yes, that was great. Thank you so much for that introduction.
I think you're going to have to turn off one of your microphones.
Hold on.
Okay. And you have to turn on the other one.
Rebecca, you need to unmute one microphone, but you need to turn off the sound coming out of the other computer.
I think it's better to mute this other one.
Whoa.
It's ringing.
Rebecca, you need to not mute the microphone, but mute the speaker.
How do you do that?
Can you just log out of your other one?
Okay.
And now you need to unmute your microphone on that one.
I
Okay.
know. I needed to pull it down. It was minimized. Okay. Sorry about that delay. Let me get this up. Go away. Okay. Now I am not finding share.
Rebecca, there you go.
There we go. Okay, let's go to the beginning. Here we are. So as you know, there is a citizen petition which has been submitted, which proposes 2 amendments to the recently adopted open space subdivision bylaw, which is the ZBL sections 4.5. There are 2 proposed changes, and these include, they fall in 2 categories. One is for drinking water standards that comply with the Safe Drinking Water Act. The wording is, would you like me to read the wording, Daryl?
No, what I would rather do is, if you were reading the wording, is explain what is intended by each part of what you're.
Okay, so there are 2 proposed changes. One is pertaining to drinking water standards, and it specifically states that now this will apply only in a circumstance where a subdivision does not meet the standards by the state definition of a public water supply. And these are intended to allow a subdivision to comply with the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Freshwater Act. Those are the 2 laws which basically say that every person has a right to safe drinking water, and that require the drinking water standards, which we follow routinely at the board and at the state level. The second amendment is specifically pertaining to the timing of the environmental health impact reporting, which we already require within our regulations. So our regulations are not deficient. Just how the wording of this bylaw creates a situation which challenges how sort of makes it more difficult for the Board of Health to apply our existing regulations. As we've already reviewed, and Daryl did a nice job, thank you. The issue arises because Sherborn has 100% private drinking water. Our Sherborn regulations, most standard development scenarios would involve 1 house with 1 well. And I know the Board of Health knows this. And that means that in a subdivision, which we all agree that is desirable to protect open space and for other reasons, it will not, by definition, in some circumstances, be able to meet the wetland and the setbacks which are included in our Board of Health regulations. In these requirements, which are being proposed in these amendments to the existing zoning bylaw, are not inconsistent with the standard required procedures in 98% of towns in Massachusetts, which are regulated by DEP as public water supplies. It's simply that we do not have protections because of our private water supplies, which in a subdivision will be shared resources. Environmental health impact reporting at the stage of permitting, we already require this, but when done in advance at the very beginning of a project, as is the standard procedure at the state level, and big, huge project is already required. 40Bs, for example, this is required at the beginning. It will avoid conflicts, and it will be make it easier for our board to enforce our regulations if this is always done upfront in order to make good decisions, in order to make systems which are effective and safe, and which will hopefully avoid unintended consequences and also reduce liability for the town of Sherborn. It certainly will decrease costs for the town and for all of those involved if one decision, which is a good decision, is made at the outset. This is the second section, which is a little bit more vague. And the reason it's vague is because of the state definitions. And in order to allow the Board of Health to create regulations which will facilitate appropriate sort of addressing of each situation. And clearly, we have regulations that apply, but I don't know whether our board will decide that they want to have a blanket regulation that applies to every single subdivision, whether big or small, or whether it will be deemed more appropriate that it should be done on an individual basis, case by case, determined by the specific circumstances of a development. So I left that vague, but by definition, a private water supply does not require testing, monitoring, or reporting. And the problem with a subdivision that does not meet our setback requirements is that it not only puts the Board of Health into a situation where it's difficult to enforce our existing regulations, but it may potentially endanger public health and increase the liability for the town if there is, if a resident has methemoglobinemia or with emerging contaminants or with hepatitis. It's very, very common for hepatitis to be found in shared private water supplies as well as public water supplies, but it would not be, the town would carry liability for that, and it would have the ability to help us to comply with some of the drinking water laws, which are designed to protect individual rights and property rights and also property values, because certainly if contamination were to take place, it could be our responsibility if we don't have regulations that have at least made an attempt to prevent these events from taking place. So in the conclusion, this is actually so funny because looks like I chose the wrong presentation. So it's not the one I put together for tonight, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. It's all the same material. This would prevent unintended consequences, and it would decrease the value. So the most important points that I was going to make that are different is obviously our Board of Health has existing regulations, and obviously everybody understands the issues to a great and very personal extent. So this was not in any way intended, and I kind of feel bad about the fact that the timing has led to challenges in proper collaboration between boards, but a lot of thoughtful consideration was put into the development of this bylaw. And we definitely, our opinions were definitely sought. People put a lot of consideration into these issues. And I believe that a couple points that were raised in the last maybe couple years, but especially the most recent months, have raised a couple points of weakness in this bylaw, which I think were not intended in any way. And so this was what led to the citizens petition. And I know it's kind of short notice, but I was hoping, maybe it's just me being inexperienced with procedures, but it seemed to me that there would still, even though it's late, there should be time to be able to get together, go over some of these changes and potentially implement some of them now, because I think that we really want to have things in place so we can prevent damage and before it's too late, because once something happens, it's too late. And we might have a couple circumstances in town already where, it's too late. So the main changes that are suggested here would be to specify within the bylaw a requirement to have environmental health impact reporting at the time of permitting in order to prevent unintended consequences. And the second change would be to allow the Board of Health to have a requirement within the bylaw to allow, or Board of Health requirements are in this bylaw. It's required that the Board of Health regulations be followed. However, the bylaw is internally contradictory because the same bylaw allows the setback requirements to not be followed, and that puts the board in an impossible position. And I believe that we need to, because of the fact that that is included in the bylaw, we also need to include in the bylaw the requirement for testing and monitoring and reporting, which is not required by definition at the state level with a private water supply. That might be the case and might be shared, which creates a unique situation where individual rights are not easy to protect. So that was the intention, and hopefully we can consider some of these changes. I apologize for the late notice and the manner in which this took place. It wasn't intended to be in any way controversial, and I hope that there is some merit in your view as a board. So that is basically what I had put together, even though this isn't the presentation I wrote for the board. This is the presentation I made for the general public. So it includes a lot of things that maybe you already know.
Okay, so if you could stop screen sharing, I just want to bring up the other copy.
Yes.
For reference.
Daryl, is it okay if I dive in while you're doing that? Oh, there you go. You're lucky split. Never mind.
All right. Sure. If you would have something you want to kick off with.
I guess for me, it's sort of a philosophical process question. And I sort of think both to our own previous revision of bylaws, where the process of public hearing and discussion, I felt like added value as we just take cesspools, for example. We sort of had a regulation that we thought was good and thoughtful, appropriate, addressing an important issue. I think we got public feedback in the process of hearings that led us to modify that in ways that I think were important and benefited from that process. And my own reaction is I don't disagree with the importance of the issues that Rebecca raises, but at the same time, I feel like my preference would be to outline something more like the approach Gino did, where I sort of have both a flashback to our cesspool discussions and then sort of the time that Marion spent with us when planning board was working on their bylaw to sort of address it and vet it and to get that input. And I guess my only concern is, we're sort of bypassing it, and again, I think Rebecca and the proponents of the article are totally welcome and well within their sort of rights to do it. I guess it just gives me pause because I think that we provided Marion feedback that helped the open space subdivision bylaw be better. We got feedback from the community related to the revision to our bylaws as it related to cesspools. And I worry that losing those opportunities, like we see the regulations are durable and lasting, and the sort of precision is important. And I guess that's the part that gives me pause, is like, this feels like something that's important, but also should get kind of procedural due process. Although again, I don't mean to assert that in a true legal sense, but just, there's a process that we typically go through that it feels like this should go through to me. And so again, if that's the general consensus, I don't know that the specific verbiage is the thing to edit now, although again, I'm happy for people to kind of do whatever they think makes sense, but that's just my kind of hot take.
And that is the feedback pretty much from the advisory committee and from planning board as well. So I want to, actually, I'll make this larger so it's easier to see. On point 1, I'll start with just kind of what one of my biggest concerns here is I feel like this could potentially open up to having things happen that we would not want to have happen. For example, here it says subdivisions with more than one residential unit which cannot meet local setback requirements per existing Sherborn Board of Health regulations. Well, for new projects, which is what subdivisions would be, we don't permit them to not meet our setback requirements. We don't give variances on that. And so my concern is that this could be interpreted as saying, gee, maybe they won't meet local setback requirements, and if not, then they get to do this. So I'm just concerned about how this would be interpreted and possibly used in a way that we don't want it used, because we don't want to have those variances with new construction. And then the next step, let's say this stayed. So potentially someone doesn't meet setback requirements, then they'll be required to develop protections such as, and that's just so wide open, such as that which apply to public water supplies. It doesn't say which, doesn't say whether it's all the requirements, some of the requirements, but if someone just shows a such as, they could just choose to meet the water quality standards at the time of testing. And that, without further details, that does concern me. Also, this would be, really, we are the only ones who can regulate the water supply at the local level. So even if we wanted to say that they needed to meet the public water supply criteria that the state has established, we would have to rewrite that in our own regulations to have that be applicable, because the state is not going to automatically take on the responsibility for regulating something that hasn't met their threshold criteria.
No, that's not what it says. I think you're misunderstanding.
Rebecca,
when you're done, I'll
yes,
speak.
hold
Sorry.
on, Rebecca.
Yeah.
No, I'm saying that's, as someone who spends her life reading regulations, that's possibly what it, well, one, that's what it's saying, and two, Mass DEP is not going to oversee them. It will be on us, and if it's on us, then we need to be ready with what are those requirements specifically. So that would be my biggest concern with that part of it. And I'm also more concerned about preventing pollution, and I'd rather work on the septic side too, and work harder on that, because then we'd have less concerns about ongoing testing. And also there's nothing now that prevents people, they have the responsibility to test their own wells over time. They have to pass the initial well installation quantity and quality requirements. And after that, we'll support folks in terms of information, but it is their responsibility. All right, anyone else on the board want to?
Yeah, I mean, I feel sort of
Comments?
similarly. I would just sort of like to say, I think the goals that this seeks to achieve are good. I mean, I agree with sort of what's trying to be achieved here, but I worry, and some of this driven, I have less experience in the board than all of you, but I think some of my short experience here is driven that where we get into trouble is when our language is imprecise. And I worry that there's too much imprecision here that could be manipulated in a way we don't intend. And while I think it's clear what your intent is to me, Rebecca, or the author's intent is, I worry that there's too much wiggle room here that could really lead to things we don't want it to. And so I think for that reason, I sort of tend to side with Matt that we may need a more protracted, more careful process to institute this to ensure that we really are getting what we want out of it. Because I think the end goal that you express is good. And I agree with that. I just want to make sure we're actually doing what we think we're doing. And I worry about some imprecision here.
Right, and that's basically what my concern is that to flesh this out, we have to be very, very clear about what the requirements are and what actions are triggered by the requirements. And that, as you said, the imprecision, we don't have the things that we would need to point to defend it. And then that if anything is vague, it's subject to all sorts of interpretation and use. And we've seen that happening, I would say, in the last 5 or so years, of very different ways of approaching what's how regulations are written and their interpretation.
And I think, Daryl, you sort of raised a point that that resonates with me. Like, again, I can like hear somebody saying, no, it says if you can't meet local setbacks, then I'm required to do it. Great, I've got protections that are like the public water supply, so that means I'm allowed to do it. And there's nothing that Rebecca said that makes me feel like that's the regulatory intent here. It's really to say, like, we want to make sure that we cover it. But I think that's a good illustration of some of the challenges that could come up, even with like thoughtful, prepared work that I know you guys have put into it. But again, like I would feel better having it follow a more typical workflow for regulatory revision in terms of both inviting public input and having public comment and having the ability for kind of multiple boards to deliberate on it, because I think they are important issues. If there's no other comment, maybe is that okay with you, Daryl and Matt, to recognize Rebecca? Perfect. Fire away. Let me pass the baton.
Can I speak? That was, first of all, this wording was chosen after review with a municipal lawyer because the Board of Health, it allows the Board of Health to determine the regulations. However, by the way the open space bylaw is written, it allows setbacks to not be met. And so this would apply when in the open space subdivision bylaw, when the setbacks don't apply. It doesn't allow setbacks to not be applied, but it says if they don't apply, then the Board of Health has the authority to require protections that would exist in a public water supply. It doesn't in any way, it's not legally a public water supply, it's a private water supply. So it's under the jurisdiction of the Board of Health. So it's the Board of Health and the Board of Health's regulations that determines the specifics. It just specifies that if those setbacks are not met, the Board of Health has the authority to use their regulations to protect public health and all the other related components.
My recollection for the setback variances, although like I looked at this in some detail for the open space subdivision a couple of months ago, and I see Marion on, sorry, Marion, if I've got it wrong, please feel free to correct me. My recollection was the setbacks is really the lot dimensions and other pieces, where in this it says per existing Sherborn Board of Health regulations. I think the open space subdivision explicitly alludes to the fact that there may be greater setbacks that are required, but I don't recall them ever allowing a buildable lot that didn't satisfy the Board of Health regulations. I think it was more like so that parenthetical that says per existing Sherborn Board of Health regs, I don't recall any open space subdivision portions that allowed them to bypass that. I think it was only the layout of the lots.
Right,
It's
more
only
under the
a-
zoning
sorry.
board of appeals type thing.
Yeah, but this only applies if they're not met. It doesn't,
But if you say
but it
cannot meet
doesn't,
local
it
setback,
doesn't allow it to be not met.
But I
No,
think the
but-
argument
allows
is
the
that it
Board
could
of
be
Health-
interpreted that it does allow it.
right,
but
and so
it-
here it says cannot meet local setback requirements per existing Sherborn Board of Health regulations. I read that as doesn't meet local setback requirements as it relates to our regulation, which I don't think that the open space bylaw otherwise permits. Like, I don't think it allows them to bypass Board of Health regulations at all. And so if you took out
No.
that parenthetical, I think it would be better but I still think it'd be vulnerable to say they didn't meet the setbacks and so they have to do this step 2, as opposed to, like Daryl's point, like if they don't meet setbacks, it wouldn't be approvable.
Yeah, so by definition, state law for a private water supply does not require testing, monitoring, or reporting. This sentence allows the Board of Health to have, in a bylaw, it gives the Board of Health the authority to require testing when it's not otherwise required by law, because it wouldn't be required if it's not technically a public water supply. So this simply applies when the setbacks don't apply, and it gives the Board of Health the authority to require testing when it's technically a private water supply, which doesn't require testing by state law.
Right,
So I didn't
because
even-
the state has given the local boards of health the authority to, and the requirement to regulate private water supplies. And we
Yes,
have
yes.
that, and we do that, but we do not have anything written in our regulations yet that calls for ongoing monitoring. We have the initial
That's right.
requirements and we
It just
recommend it,
says
but
that
it's not in
we
our
would do it.
regulation yet. If we have to have it in our regulations.
Yes,
So
of course.
this can't come before we do that.
No, all it says is in the bylaw, because it needs to be in the bylaw, because it by state law it doesn't apply. So all it says is if the setback requirements can't be applied, the Board of Health regulations apply, and they also apply already by state law. But by state law, you can't require testing or monitoring. So we're in a quandary if we, and we could be sued. But but the bylaw specifically says that we want cluster zoning, and the bylaw specifically is going to be associated with increased risks by definition and by the way it's worded. And because of that, this allows the Board of Health to require testing when it's not required by state law, by definition.
Except that
So
we
the
don't
problem
currently
is-
have a mechanism for testing, and this is where that such as comes in, right? Like the phrase such as is sort of difficult here because it says we could develop protections such as those which apply to public water supplies.
Right.
It still leaves
And
it
that
pretty
allows-
vague.
Correct, but that's what allows our board to determine what they are.
And I guess I would
Because
rather our board determine that and be precise than have something vague.
Of course, but this just says, this is separate from our regs. This is just in the bylaw, because the bylaw says you can do cluster zoning. So if the cluster zoning meets the regs, excellent. But if it doesn't meet the regs, there are increased risks. So this just simply says, if the zoning doesn't meet the regs, the Board of Health can require extra protections, and that will be included in the Board of Health regs, but it's not specified here because it's just saying the Board of Health regs apply.
So I'd
And
like to
we
ask
have
a-
to write those.
I think we're going in circles, and I think we're probably not going to come eye to eye on this. I understand where you're going, and I sort of disagree, but that's fine.
Yeah, I would echo that where, again, I think I have not seen any place where there's a broad, non-specific regulation where the guidance has been, no, you can totally just come up with the rules on the fly, or you can totally come up with it. I think that we need to have clear reference standards in place when you make the regulation. And if we're saying, here's a bylaw change and it references a thing we haven't made yet. I think that is challenging. And again, I'm really uncomfortable because again, I recognize you read it differently. When you say cannot meet local setback requirements, maybe can you explain, Rebecca, what requirements do you have in mind with that statement? Like, what's a setback requirement we're expecting to be unmet that would sort of trigger this?
The Board of Health has regulations, and one of the ways that we protect our private water supplies is with required setbacks. If a cluster zone doesn't meet, say a lot, I mean, it would depend on a particular project. I don't know. It would have to be a specific, something coming before the board. If a presented plan doesn't meet the setback requirements, it allows us, in the absence of state law, to say, okay, because these shared water supplies are going to have increased output, increased demand, and potential increased risks, we are going to require extra testing, and the rules are in the regs. But it just says if they aren't there, I mean, if the subdivision doesn't meet the setback regulations, protections are going to be allowed. Since state law doesn't require it.
If they don't meet the setback requirements, we shouldn't be moving forward at all. Like, I don't need the rest of this regulation, because you'd say if new construction doesn't meet the setback, that's not a place that we grant variances. So why would we set conditions of how we'll test for something we shouldn't permit in the first place? Like,
I don't know, it passed a town meeting last May.
But the setbacks don't like, if you look at the open space subdivision as it relates to the septic setbacks and other pieces, like, it's a place where the language is imprecise, and that's one of the gaps we have. But it does not reduce the setbacks. It says they may be greater, but it doesn't specify what the basis for that assertion would be. There's nothing that I saw that said that they can be smaller than the Board of Health setbacks. And if you've got a specific site in the reg, I'm totally happy to read it, and perhaps I'm misrecalling, but I remember that pretty clearly. I do think that the EHIR assessment in the context of the open space subdivision is intimately tied as a way that the board could reasonably arrive at what the modified setbacks would be. But again, I think that I don't recall any, like, for me, like, if we get to the end of the first sentence, it should be this project isn't moving forward, because I wouldn't grant a variance for new construction for an open space subdivision for any of the setbacks.
Yeah, well, I know, I can just say that before I submitted this, it was reviewed by both an environmental lawyer and a municipal lawyer. And one of them said, this is a no-brainer. And the other one said, this is going to be really hard for the town to not implement. So I don't know, maybe we need to, I'm not a lawyer.
I mean, I think that's not the question, Rebecca. I agree with Matt. I can't find where in the open space subdivision it permits us to violate the Board of Health setbacks.
No, I don't. I'm just saying that if something were to happen, cluster zoning does have increased risks associated with it. That's something that's standard.
No, I understand that. I understand that. But I think what we're trying to say is that if they can't meet Board of Health setbacks, we just won't approve the plan. So why do we need to go further than that?
Sorry, I was just I just thought it would be helpful for the board to have something to lean on. And I think it's reasonable. It was reasonable according to two lawyers. This was well intended. If you don't like it, sorry.
No, I completely agree.
Why don't we have it reviewed by a lawyer and see what they say?
I completely agree. It's well intended, and I absolutely think that we need more protections in this area. I think no question about that. I just want to make sure we don't unintentionally make things more confusing or open us up to things that we don't already allow.
That's good. Well, I mean, we can include everything in the regulations.
So I just want to, I see Carol's comment in the chat, and I see Brian's comment. I'd like to just pause for a second to say, to just kind of check with Daryl and Matt. I think the question is, are we in a position to say the Board of Health endorses this regulation versus is there some other strategy? Is that kind of our output that we expect in terms of kind of framing the scope of public comment? Because again, I would echo Matt. I think the importance of filling in regulatory gaps that have been identified is important. And I am worried that this language will not succeed in that. And I recognize the good intentions of the proponents, but again, I'm like, that's part of what my job is to say, does this make sense? And I think I'm happy to have the discussion about the prudence or the necessity of it. But again, I think we could say we all agree on the importance of it and may still be concerned about the verbiage or the process. And so is our role for public comments on the sort of necessity or importance of the topic, or is it on sort of what's the scope of that, or what's the output we expect to come from tonight?
I guess I would think the output here would be whether we endorse this specifically. I would hope that we would all endorse the principle behind it. I think the question is whether this is the best way to achieve it. And so I think you're right. I think the question is the Board of Health endorse this as written narrowly, as opposed to they endorse the general concept, right? Because I think we do endorse the general concept. I think the question is, do we endorse this as written?
Absolutely. And we continue to work on that. So yes, I think that's what the typical process is that when someone has a warrant article, whether it's from a citizens group or from another board, that they usually vet it with other boards and committees to get their endorsement or hear their concerns about it. So there is, just to answer one question in the chat, and I had forgotten to shut it down earlier so people would just speak. So Brian, yes, we're going to take public comment. I'd like to go to Courtney and then Carol.
And then presumably Brian.
Yeah. All right. Courtney Eck, 41 Green Lane. I thought that there had been talk in the past that this would be something that the Board of Health was looking to regulate, like those smaller in-between systems. I'm not sure that adding to the zoning bylaw is the right way to do it, or that it's legitimate. I thought this should be a Board of Health regulation change.
Okay, thank you. And Carol?
Hi, Carol McGarry, 262 Western Avenue. And I want to say that I'm speaking as a resident and not as a member of Conservation Commission. So I had a couple of thoughts about this. One, I did want to comment that Paul Variances has said at the select board meeting that this could be amended at town meeting. So if Board of Health sincerely believes that the intent is correct, then potentially there might be time to address this, to go back and look more carefully at the open space bylaw, to have town council weigh in, which has already been requested by advisory to select board, is my understanding, and to get some of these things cleared up. The second thing I wanted to say, and this is somewhat informed by being on Conservation Commission, but again, I in no way speak at all for Conservation Commission. This is my own personal opinion, is that one of the things that this does is it gives the Board of Health a principle to look to. I know from being on a regulatory board that at the town level, you often look to the state, right? Because the state has regulations that provide guidance. But in this case, there are no state regulations. And the purpose of this appears to me to be to fill that gap and to actually provide a kind of guidance for Board of Health. Now, you may say, well, the wording isn't correct, certain words should be changed, but to me, this feels like it's filling a gap that will actually support Board of Health when they start writing more specific regulations. And then the last thing, and I put this into the chat, that is in the open space bylaw, that wording about clustered or shared septic systems are likely to require setbacks greater than standard single family systems, et cetera. So I think one of the members of the board made the comment that, well, of course, we're going to follow our current setbacks, but I think the point that Rebecca's making is that the setbacks that are outlined in your regulations presumably are for the same kind of, single home development that we're used to. And unless the board has already put together some guidelines for setbacks for clustered or shared septic systems, if somebody comes to you tomorrow with a development, you're going to be not in the best shape to have something to turn to and say, well, this is what we think the setbacks should be. So I guess my final comment would be that I believe that the open space bylaw was passed about 2 years ago, and there's been no action by Board of Health or Planning Board to fill these gaps. And I applaud Rebecca for thinking about this, researching it, and bringing it to the board and coming up with a solution that really does need, there's a gap here that you've all acknowledged. So that's my comment, and I appreciate your listening to me.
Carol, I appreciate it. I think I'd add 2 comments. I'd say the last 2 years have also been the time that we've had COVID, and have spent an enormous amount of time and energy dealing with that. So just to be clear, in terms of past 2 years ago, and then what have we been up to, it's been a lot of COVID. I think for the question of, again, if we look at the plain language, cannot meet local setback requirements per existing Sherborn Board of Health regulations. If this passes in May of 2022, that, what does that mean? Does that then, again, that's another piece that can get parsed when you say you have no regulatory footprint for it. So I do think the language piece is important. And again, the cannot meet local setbacks, I read as wouldn't meet our minimum setback that exists. And I think that your inclusion of the language matches my recollection of the regulation, which says it should be larger. And again, what I think would be more appropriate in terms of a strategy to help fill this gap is the collaboration between the Planning Board, Board of Health, Concom is appropriate to say, what is that setback? How does one define that? If that's the area we want to focus on, I think that's a proper way to do it. I think somebody could sue us and say, per existing Sherborn Board of Health regulations, this was passed in May of 2022. What regulations were in place there? None. Okay, what's the reference standard? I think there's real vulnerability here. And so, again, I don't mean to minimize the importance of those issues, but again, to say, as a volunteer board, I've certainly done what I can do over the last 2 years, working on things that I think are important, but I recognize there are pieces that we can't do all of it. And so I know that collectively we've all done our best, but I'm sorry that the gap remains.
And I'd also like to mention that that's exactly why we have an EHIR requirement in place already. That we do have. And probably 2.5 years ago, roughly, we lowered the threshold for when that EHIR would apply to begin to address exactly these situations. And maybe we need, we can continue to add things, but again, it's a really complex thing when you're looking at anything ranging from 10 homes to 30 something homes to pick exactly what that would be. And that's precisely why Mass DEP has had difficulty figuring out how to bridge that gap. They recognize it, so it's falling on us. So really our EHIR requirements already exist. They're there. This first part about wells, that's, again, our setbacks are larger than the PWS. They're at 100-foot radius of protection. We have 125 to 175 minimum, depending on circumstances. So we already have that kind of added protection for the wells that this wouldn't achieve. And then again, people can still do testing. And frankly, it would be cheaper for homeowners to do their own testing than become part of a PWS process where then they need to fill out reports and do other kind of layers of of effort to comply with PWS regulations. But again, we haven't specified that specifically in our regulations. So this would, again, I'm worried about abuse with the language and the opening up to even the concept of not meeting our setback requirements, and then giving a vague action that would have to follow from that, that could take paths that we would not want to have happen, as what those choices would be of what protections an applicant would choose to pursue when we haven't specified what they are. And again, I think we have to stick with our EHIR. I also want to keep it limited to Board of Health, because EHIR is not a standard term. Environmental impact reports are a more standard term. But this particular one, if it ends up being vague on planning board, I don't think it should spill over into changing what we do, but it might. And so there could be a different reference. Also, the needs of Concom and planning board are not necessarily going to be met by our definition of an EHIR. There is some overlap, but there is not total overlap. So I would love to see some more specificity. I think the board's done pretty well at being pioneering on some things. Certainly, we were the first town to restrict vaping products and not having the flavored versions that were particularly appealing to lure children in. And we're also the only place I know of, since we did research on the manganese issue with bedrock disruption, other states were recognizing this as an issue, but hadn't passed a lot of regulations on that. So we're pretty unique in that, making a start. And
Can we just stay focused on the article? It's really not relevant. Like, all those things are what you guys are saying. First of all, all this says is the board, by definition in the open space bylaw, it says that a subdivision can be designed. If those subdivisions don't meet the setback requirements, the Board of Health has the authority to require testing such as those that would be required if it was.
Okay, stop right there.
That's all I'm
Since you
saying.
interrupted
We
me.
need to
All
write
right.
regulations. We just need to write the regulations.
So maybe
But what is such as? Like, give me a specific. what that would be.
Testing, monitoring, and reporting.
And none of those things are written, and none of those things are written in the language here, which is part of our concern with specificity.
Yes.
I would say,
Well, that's why we need regulations. So the Board of Health just needs to write regulations.
Okay.
So can we just table and say, I think it's, I'd like to let Mr. Moore make his comments, since he'd sort of asked earlier, but then I would like to move to a motion to endorse the language as provided and proceed from there. Because I feel like we're going in circles right now.
Yeah, I do too.
Could we put it on the agenda to work on together?
Rebecca, I'd like
No, it's not a Board of Health
No, but
activity.
I just want to pause. Like, again, Rebecca, I totally don't mean to be rude, but like right now, I just want to recognize Brian, and then we can close out with you and then go to the board vote.
Thank you, Brian Moore, 49 Farm Road. So you guys are obviously covering a lot of topics tonight, and I will do my best to keep this very brief and to the point. As a resident, I'm aware of many situations in town where the boards have been pitted against one another in much to their own detriment by strategies used in the development process. One example being a situation where A&R lots were approved and developed, and for whatever reason, circumnavigated or evaded the EHIR process. And I believe, as a direct result of that, neighbors near there lost their ability to rely on an existing drinking water well. So if that's an example of how our current EHIR process works, I think that this, that there's cause for concern that it's not necessarily being implemented in the correct fashion. Other examples would be situations related to wells being installed and septics being installed in such proximity to one another that it becomes inherently dangerous to public health for people in who before the project was started didn't have cause for much concern. So it's means and mode. I understand that the Board of Health does not desire to relinquish control over the well situation and the EHR situation, but as someone who, personally has spent into the 5 figures now with concerns about my own drinking water and conditions next to my property, it's very, very frustrating as someone who's gone to these meetings, participated in the board, volunteered at the town to witness someone exploit the situation. And my gut feeling is our town wasn't ready for the open space bylaw. Now, I'm not saying open space bylaw isn't good. I'm just saying our town wasn't prepared for it. And we should have put more thought and more consideration into passing a bylaw that opened the door for such development, in addition to the other type of developments that are already going on in town. And if the only lifeline I have as a resident to protect my water and try to protect what was a given fact when I moved into my house as being something that would be there forever, is to sign on to a zoning petition, a warrant article, which is going to change the zoning bylaw, so be it. And I think that a lot of the signatures on this thing have maybe feel frustrated that there hasn't been more of a needle move in terms of changing the regulations in the Board of Health regulations or the Conservation Commission regulations or the other regulations to account for the fact that there's this desire to develop rather quickly whatever open space remains in this town, whether it's called a subdivision, whether it's called an A&R, or whether it's called an open space. Right now we're really at a crux because as a town, we're one of the few towns left with a lot of open space around. And people are going to find ways to exploit this. And as a team, I think we should be working together to make sure that the applicants or the people who come forward and try to develop these properties don't keep you all in your individual silos on these boards, because they pitch you against one another. And we see it happen every week at all these different meetings. And as look from the outside looking in, it's extremely frustrating that we can't get traction on what we believe are black and white issues with the bylaw. So I understand that probably this warrant article is going to receive zero support from the boards, but I think it would be in the board's interest to at least make sure that in your resolution or your board vote on this or whatever you do, that you recognize that there is a gap between where you're regulating and where the state regulates, and that it should receive proper attention during the next year to make sure that these types of problems aren't a recurrent issue for the town.
Brian, just to be,
that's all I had to say. Thank you for listening.
Just to be clear, like what the applicant got as guidance from planning board is we haven't had enough time to review this. We'd recommend a collaborative approach that you kind of present to the other boards and that we work on this together over the course of the summer with the goal of getting to the 2023 town meeting. So again, I'm not saying, I think to your point about silos and the importance of doing it in a sense of urgency, I think that's all there. Again, I want to be completely clear of like, I have spent hundreds of hours on COVID. I have had no additional time as a volunteer with 2 young kids to be able to say, hey, what more can you do? At this point, I've had days where I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning to do work so that I could be up until 10 o'clock at night to have these conversations. So I hear your frustration. I want to acknowledge my own, which is to say the expectations that people have of what a volunteer board can do and how many things they can do simultaneously, particularly one that was heavily impacted by COVID, is in no way a reflection of the importance we do. And I think for some of the issues that you raised, Daryl commented on about the issues with ledge disruption and other pieces. And so I think that we certainly have demonstrated a track record of thinking this is important. I don't want you to take home from this, boy, the board doesn't think this is worth doing. I think it's willing to say, you know, since 2020, what are the things we've been doing? Like, it's been tough and we've been doing our best, but I don't think it in any way should be taken as this is not an important issue. This is not something that needs to get addressed. And speaking for myself personally, I do think, to Carol's earlier point, we have a part of that regulation that has a gap. That's a perfect illustration of how would one fill that gap? How do we add precision to the regulation so that when we say it may have a greater setback requirement, like, what's the basis for that? How does an EHIR fit into that? How do we sort of parse those things together? I think for me, the concern I have about the regulation isn't about the importance of the issue. It's about, how do you do this so it's going to withstand legal scrutiny? How do you do it so that it sort of works for the other boards and it's going to be successful? So for me, this is not time to table it or put it in the closet and sort of ignore it. It's really to say, like, I think this is really important. I think we need to work really hard to make sure that the things we do are successful and effective. And I worry that if we do something that doesn't meet that standard, our likelihood of having adverse kind of outcomes compared to what I suspect are widely shared common goals is pretty high. So for me, I want to be really explicit to say, I hear what you're saying, and the challenges with this are really, the last 2 years has been no gas left in the tank. I am hopeful that we're entering a different phase, and I think there's an attention to this issue that's important. So while I suspect the vote we'll have is about a very specific motion, I think we'll then transition into, like, what are the next steps, because this remains an important issue. But it's like hard on Zoom, it's hard on the other pieces to just say, like, this is not that this doesn't feel important, it's just how do we help set it up to be effective and successful and resilient? Because I do think that it's going to be a sort of complicated area where we work together.
Well, just for the record, you know, I, for one, I'm sure my wife shares the sentiment that I think you guys have done a great job during COVID. That's not been easy for anyone. And I appreciate volunteerism, having done it myself. And I appreciate being heard on this matter tonight, as trivial as my comments might be. But thank you very much. I really do appreciate it.
Not trivial. It just means that when we work on it, again, I would encourage folks as we do this. I think our experience last time was that the public comment was incredibly helpful for the regulatory revisions. And I think one of my lessons learned from the last regulatory cycle was sort of more community engagement earlier would have helped our process work better. But I also felt like the public hearing process brought points of view that were clearly really important to the community. But until there was a public hearing, even as it was a posted agenda, there were lots of people who it mattered to deeply who sort of weren't there because they just weren't aware. And so I think that's the other part that's important to me, is just remembering, like, there are parts of that experience that I really felt like, gosh, I could have done a better job on this piece. And I want to kind of be true to that experience to say, like, I do think this is important, and I do want to make sure that it's sort of transparent and has a developmental process that supports it, because I really do think it's important. So unless there's other comment for Daryl or Matt, I would like to make a motion to approve the language as provided in the warrant article for endorsement by the Board of Health.
Just to be clear, you're moving to endorse this language.
I'm moving to endorse this language. So an I vote would say, yes, I like this language. The Board of Health endorses it. A nay vote would not provide an endorsement for this language.
Got it. Okay.
All right, so moved.
Seconded.
And I'd like to have just a little more discussion.
Okay,
So,
away, Daryl.
I think Matt captured a lot of things really well. Not only because of the incredible demands during the last 2 years, but in general. And I would say we've had many more complex projects coming along than we've had in a long time. We had double the number of applications for these years because people were abandoning cities for the most part. So the workload has been staggering. Yet, this board is so committed to groundwater quality. That's what we spend most of our time, well, we used to spend most of our time on. Now it's kind of a mix between COVID and that. So there's absolutely no lack of dedication or interest in this from the board. But regulations are incredibly difficult to write, as Brian, I would assume you know, and some of the other folks who are involved with regulatory activities. It takes years for state governments to rewrite things or even issue a new version of stormwater regulations, for example. And we're a volunteer board. We're trying to take care of these things. We're trying to look at it. Again, I've told you that DEP acknowledges that these are tough things, that they find it hard to figure out how to bridge some of these gaps. But they're not total gaps in our regulations. We have some very good, strong regulations that we enforce to the best of our ability. And we do have provisions, again, for the EHIR that exists, and I think is a good element of our regulations. So again, my main concern with this is that, one, I have a hard time seeing what the criteria are for application, and then what the specific actions are to be taken. Like, I don't read this and say, there's the one thing that we can do that we're not doing now. I'm not finding that in this. And that, again, leads me to worry about unintended consequences of this kind of vague language. That's it.
I maybe have just one more comment and we can move on. I don't want to add too much to what Matt and Gerald just said, because I think they both put a lot of it really well. I haven't lived through a regulatory cycle on this board, but I've lived through enough production of guidance to have experienced sometimes getting it wrong unintentionally, and find that actually in the end can do more harm than good. And so I want to get this right. And I feel like the underlying issues are important. I think the AHIR is an important tool we have. I think we need to specify it further. In some ways, I worry that what's proposed here doesn't even go far enough in defining when we can apply that, and leaves more gaps. And so I think I want to get to a place where we do this right, and where we're able to more clearly apply these things to regulate better. And I just worry that as written, it doesn't get there.
Perfect. With that, Matt, are you prepared to vote?
I am prepared to vote, and Matt Beavers, nay.
Matt Vitale, nay.
Daryl Beardsley, nay.
Okay, and I'd like to pivot immediately into next steps, because while I don't think the warrant article gets to where I'd like to see us, I think if I were Brian Moore, when Daryl Beardsley said X, Y, and Z takes years, like my anxiety level would go up and be like, years is not the right cadence. And I think that really, again, as we come out of COVID, thinking about what are the things we need to focus on as a board, for me, like the conversation, particularly around the open space subdivision, feels like a prudent area to sort of start that work, to the point Carol made about how do we specify what those setbacks are. I think Marion did a truly unbelievable amount of work in terms of communicating and disseminating this. But I also think you then get to say, okay, now when we're really starting to think about it in a concrete plan, even if that didn't move forward, there's an opportunity to say, where did that sort of stress test identify where we need to fill in pieces? And I think specificity and that regulatory infrastructure is something we should do. I really like the idea of doing that collaboratively with Conservation Commission and with Planning Board, and figuring out what pieces of that are in joint meetings versus kind of each area doing pieces of their homework and bringing it back, with the sort of the clustering of septic systems as a point source of contamination being a particularly Board of Health issue, but then thinking about how to integrate, I think, the important issues that this raises about the timeliness and availability of information for consideration, goes to Brian's point about some of the fragmentation we can see, and some of the sort of pieces of, if our goal is to have the best product, being thoughtful about how we do that out of the gate makes a lot of sense to me. And so I'd love for this to be kind of, again, I don't want to get like too corporate and like, this is like our 2022 goal, but like, this feels like the place where there's clearly a burning platform for this. And I think it's important. And so it's certainly something I'm comfortable saying this feels like one of the important pieces to work that needs to be a priority for us. And I suspect that aligns. I've never heard Daryl say like, nah, water safety, I'm kind of plus minus on, like I think this is an important issue to all of us. It's just, how do we get there? But this feels like a really appropriate focus for us right now, particularly as it relates to open space subdivision. Does that sound kind of right to you, Daryl and Matt?
I'd also say that, again, in the fall of 2019, we were talking about hiring a consultant, or even, I think even in the winter of 2019, to help with this so that we could have someone who could check regulations from other locations who have already figured out how to write it. So that was, one strategy. And again, to get more support. I think we also, over the last few years, have identified areas that we could target first for regulatory development to avoid the many years of that it would take to do some soup to nuts kind of a revision. And the planning board has been very clear that they would like to collaborate on this kind of thing.
The only thing I might add to all this is I'm not sure we should totally limit ourselves to the open space subdivision question when it comes to this, because that leaves off many issues we've seen with A&R lots and sequencing. And I think we need to consider, how do we define where does an EHR apply? And how do we sort of decide, what defines a clustered septic system? And I think some of those are areas where we need clarity that we don't have right now.
And I'd say that, so we do have a point at which the EHIR becomes triggered for the Board of Health, right? We've set conditions and thresholds that do that. But I know some of the concerns expressed by folks has been that at what point does a project become a project? When's it whole? We have one way of measuring that. Others have another way of measuring that. That's an area that might be, and that wouldn't necessarily be limited to subdivisions. It's just different trigger points for different actions for different boards.
And I think some of the other thing I'd say is, like, I think to Courtney's earlier point, like, some of those things will be stuff that sits with Board of Health, and some of those are going to be things that we say, this is a gap we see. How do we communicate that to the board and whose shop it sets? And that board may choose to take action or not take action, but I think we can at least sort of in the process flag it. And so I think those seem like reasonable next steps. And so it certainly seemed like Gino and the planning board were amenable to that kind of collaboration and to a timeline that includes this as like a thing we're actively working on with real end goals and kind of real timeframes. And so that feels like a good start. I would love to see it make sure that we're consistent with how the planning board does it, because I think those inconsistencies are another vulnerability if they develop, or if we kind of do something that's inconsistent, that can be a problem. So I really like the idea of doing that in a paired fashion, which hopefully helps address some of the points Brian raised in his comments about just the fragmentation and siloing between boards. I think if we can kind of co-develop it, that really should help a lot. And then
Rebecca, are you able to unmute yourself?
Am I unmuted?
Yep.
So we need to update our regulations, but I feel that we need to do something because the bylaw is in effect. And as you pointed out, this is great. Right now, there's no guidelines, there are no regulations. It's a free for all. And, well, you know what I mean? I'm just saying that I believe we need to have something that's an amendment to the bylaw itself, because the bylaw itself specifies that cluster zoning is allowed, and it puts the board without any statutory protection in a position that's very challenging when threshold for public water supply is not met. So I think we shouldn't be waiting for a full year, and I know it's late, but it's still, we still might have time to do something that would be useful.
Well, we've already voted,
Yeah.
but we can talk about regulatory reform within the board.
So-
I would point out that to me, my biggest concern is from the septic side. Again, to me, it's about preventing the contamination from starting in the first place, not from testing after the fact. So that's, I'm just going to suggest that that's the way I'm going to view it in the future for where my priorities are going to be.
I would echo that. I think one of the things that I would sort of piggyback on is, again, I feel like the public water, like thinking about the impacts of a public water supply or clustered water supply as it affects abutters is another place where there's opportunity at the subdivision level to be really explicit about how to measure those in an either theoretical framework, if there's a sort of pre-plan assessment, but just to understand we're pulling out X number of gallons as part of this project. If it's a clustered system, that's a point source that is sort of widely shared. I think for me, that is not in the same tier as the importance of the setbacks for the septic system, but it's another one I'd love to think about in scope if that proves feasible. But if we had to pick, I would share the focus on the clustered systems as a particular area of focus.
I agree. I think it's also a more tractable problem in many ways. I think it will be easier to define when things get triggered and define setbacks for that than potentially for the public water supply piece.
Perfect. Okay, so for our next steps, again, and Rebecca, I think as the proponent, like whatever steps you take in terms of pursuing the language is kind of at your discretion. If it gets past the town meeting, then some of this. Actually, I guess none of it's moot because we'd still say kind of getting the right regulations is important. My own position is, no need to re-adjudicate, particularly after 10. But I think to the folks who are understandably focused on this, like I do agree. I think this is an important issue, and my hope is that we're going to be in a position to be able to kind of collaborate with other boards to tackle it. I guess.
All right, so we have one more, well, 2, 3 more issues, but I can do one really fast and finally not just delay it to the next time. So I finally went through the public health nurse position information that we had, and I modified it according to our discussions that we had. But a couple other things have come up. Dover had an assessment done of Board of Health needs there, and they received from their consultants a recommendation that perhaps we do shared service. They do shared services with Sherborn. And so that is something that we can investigate. And as a nice coincidence, I got a call from MAHB this week to say that in their discussions with Sam Wong, who I forget the exact position, he's with DPH for local public health. Ellen, do you?
Local and regional public health.
Okay. And they're working on trying to set up more shared services among towns to offer, expand capabilities. And they were talking about Dover and Sherborn. And since they share a school system and are both small towns, have similar situations, they want to try to help us with getting shared services grants. So I think perhaps the next step is to find out more information from them about what they would need from us or what we need to do and what help they would be able to offer for that, and more discussion with Dover about how we would pursue that. So if that's okay with folks, I will continue to look into that.
Yeah, I think that sounds great.
Okay, so that's that update. And then we have minutes for approval. And do we have a motion to, I am assuming that there were various minor amendments, in which case I'd ask for a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
So moved.
Okay.
Any other comments? Okay, Matt?
Matt Beavers, aye.
Oh, Rebecca, I think you're up.
Yeah.
I'm all kinds of just
Rebecca
going-
Honeywell, aye.
Apparently I could process one change, but not two changes. So the combination of Daryl reposition and Lisa absent, I'm done for. But I will be an aye.
And Daryl, aye. And then agenda items for the next meeting.
Daryl, can I just add one other comment as it relates to the minutes?
Sure.
So just, for folks, there had been a previous open meeting law complaint as it related to the approval of minutes. And I think it was ultimately determined that that was not, sort of not further pursued by the state. So I'm enthusiastic that we're improving the March 2nd minutes, but for the general approval of minutes, it was determined that the exigencies of COVID as it related to the impacts on a local board of health were sort of outside the typical patterns of staffing impact that would be expected for any government agency, and as such, sort of qualified as an extraordinary circumstance. And I would also then just thank Ellen for a ton of work to produce really good minutes.
Yes, unfortunately, none of us are capable, Ellen. So it does fall on your shoulders. Okay, and agenda items, certainly if something comes up, we have
Ellen,
how
can
many
you just-
variances next time, Ellen? Variance hearings? It's a lot.
Yeah, there are 5 variance hearings at the next meeting.
Yeah, that's what I thought of with tonight's edition. Okay, and then, all right. Are we ready to adjourn? Would someone like to make the motion?
So moved.
Seconded.
Can I just say one thing before
yeah.
we adjourn? Rebecca, can you please send me your
Yes.
PowerPoint that you provided tonight? I will need that for the minutes.
Yeah, I was just writing you a message.
Okay, voting?
Oh, Matt Beavers, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Matt Vitale, aye.
And before I say aye, I forgot I want to mention one other thing. I guess everyone, but Rebecca, I don't know if you've had a chance to set up the new Sherborn MA email accounts that we now have.
Yeah, I saw that. I have not, but I saw
Okay.
the email.
All right. Okay, and
Rebecca, as soon as you set it up, please send me an email so that I can confirm that it works for you. And they did this, interim town administrator did say to set it up as soon as possible and to stop using your other email immediately.
And then the other thing I did, because I think it's tough, I mean, at least for me to update people, I set up an auto reply just so that I know when school committee had done their migration, some of them had set it up, which was a helpful cue for me to update mine. So I would just encourage folks who have Gmail, you can set up auto forwarding so it forwards, but to also set up auto replies so that you can just say, hey, just so you know, my email changed, so folks get the memo. But it's certainly helpful to have, and will make it easier to produce public records requests, which is great.
okay, and Daryl, aye. So now we can all
Have a good night, guys.
go have a good night. Bye.
Thanks.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, Mark.